Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining. My name is Mustafa Dumbuya. We will spend the next 15 minutes to wait for everyone else to join, and then we'll start the training. Good morning, Alima, Gilbert, Malcolm.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry for starting you up early, everyone, but we've been trying different times for our online engagements, and it happens that particularly for journalists, we've been able to get their attention better during the early hours before they go out to start their day. So we're hoping that we'll be here until we'll start at 8:30ish, and then we'll be here until 11, the max, and then we'll be done. Hopefully we can even finish before then.
All right.
Good morning.
Good morning. Marcy, are you here already?
Yes, I'm here.
Karibu. How are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. Good morning, Halima. Good morning, Malcolm.
Good morning.
And everyone else who's online. Hope you had a rest.
Exactly. I should be looking at the register now to see who is here and who is not.
Yeah, we have a couple of guys online.
We still have a very manageable numbers of people, so I should be able to give personal shout out. We have Collins, good morning. We have Ibuku, Elizabeth, and Esther, Mildred. There is someone who's named Nairobi herself, Pauline, Rebecca, Tebby, Terry, Thomas, Wilson, and Wyban. Some of the names are familiar, some not, but good morning and welcome to everyone. See, we're getting more greetings from the chat. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, Thomas Boere. Good morning, Rebecca, and welcome. Okay. Good morning, Guyo and Karibu from Masterbit. I think that would be helpful to know where everyone is joining us from. I was informed about 100 people actually signed up for this training. So let's see who actually joins from that 100. Good morning, Damaris, and welcome. You are with us in Nairobi. Asha, good morning. Tebi, good morning, and congratulations as well. Tebi recently won a national award from the Media Council of Kenya. Good morning, Stephen. I know you are here with us in Nairobi. You're welcome, Tebi. Good morning, Nashipe, Karibu. Good morning, Lydia from Turkana. Karibu. Maldrin, good morning. Walusula, good morning. And Karibu. Cynthia Gishiri, good morning. And Karibu. Right. We'll wait about 10 more minutes and we'll actually start. We have someone from, and Melvin is coming all the way from West Pokot County, North Rift Radio. Karibu. Collins, good morning and welcome. Seeing Isaac is here. Wahini Isaac, good morning. Karen, good morning. I see you from West Pokot. Carol, good morning. I see Winnie is here with us. Good morning, Winnie. See you, Mbua.
Morning, Mustafa. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. How are you today?
Doing very well. Looking forward to this training.
Fantastic. We're all looking forward. Karibu.
Mm.
I'm wondering, maybe while we wait to just manage our time as well, probably we should just, I see everyone is introducing on the chat, but maybe it's helped to, just, I wasn't sure whether to have like an open mic introductions for everyone, because we don't know how big the numbers may get. So in the meantime, it helps if you introduce on the chat. Yes. Yes, please introduce the chat, and we'll get to meet you better during the sessions. You can unmute when you have a question or you have a comment to make, you'll unmute, we'll meet you properly during the sessions. For now, feel free to go to the charts and tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. I've just been informed that there might be some confusion with the time when my colleague set up the Zoom call. I think, Bernard, did you set it up on EAT or you set it up on GMT? Because I think that might cause a serious confusion for people who are particularly not in Kenya. Because I learned, even though our target is really for Kenyan journalists, but I learned quite a lot of people from outside Kenya sign up for this.
Sure, Mustafa. It seems I'm getting to learn.
Bernard, I've seen it on GMT
and the EAT.
That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. It's on GMT. I wonder who didn't pick this up early. Yeah, GMT now. It's a different time. It's a completely different time zone. But we know what will happen. This session will be recorded and we will put it up on a YouTube channel. So people who may have missed this due to this error from our side will be able to catch up with the session later. And Bernard, you can, for all the people that sign up, it also be helpful to email it to them, to email the whole thing to them later. I just see it's right on the banner here. It says GMT. And GMT, I assume it to be like 11 a.m. in Kenya, because there's a 3 hour time zone difference. I come from a GMT time zone. So for GMT people, they are deep asleep right now. Steve Otieno from Daily Nation, Karibu, thank you for joining us. Elizabeth Angiva from Kisii, Karibu, Elizabeth. If I get it right, Elizabeth, do you work with KBC, right? Isaac Wahinya from Radio Jangwani, good morning and Karibu. Brian Sakwa, good morning. But either way, Bernard, we will start when we should, because maybe in 5 minutes, because the people who are joining us from the GMT time zones won't be able to join us now either way, because it'll be too early. It is too early for them. So we'll share the link, the recorded link with them later.
Sure. I think that's in order, Mustafa.
Okay. Yeah, because it's for them, it's like 5 a.m. right now. So for them, it's like 5:20 a.m. right now. Yeah. You must be really committed to wake up at that time to join.
Brian Sakwa, you have something? Brian, good morning. You raised your hand.
Okay. It's like someone is at work already. The news is on. Okay.
Mustafa, can Bernard make us co-hosts so that I'm able to share my screen?
Yes, I guess Bernard, you've had, particularly for facilitators who will be doing presentations, and that will be for Halima and Gilbert and Marcy. We should make them a co-host on the platform. You can share some of your admin powers, Bernard. We know it's not easy to give up on to share power easily, but you can share some of it.
Sure.
You know, when we get power, we try to keep all of it. We don't want to share. Well, we can share. Yes, I see you adding them.
Done already.
Thanks, Bernard. You know, we will start in 2 minutes. Bernard, also I think for the you have to check the settings to make sure that the everyone else, when they want to make a contribution or speak at some point, are able to do so.
Sure.
Yeah. Marcy, maybe just wait a little bit before you share your screen for later.
Yeah, Mustafa, I'm just trying to find my way.
You're okay. You're navigating the system.
But I'm not sharing. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'm always the analog of the group, so I don't know.
Good for
problems,
you.
but I'm fine now.
Good for you. You are checking out the technology in advance. So,
yeah.
But it's showing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fine now. Yes, I shouldn't have a problem.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, I will go. So, Bernard, I think we will start. Bernard will start, so maybe we can start recording as well. Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to this seminar workshop, I will call it, which is focused on, pitching. And we realize pitching is a very important tool to have as a journalist. My name is Mustafa Dumbuya, and I am the journalism team lead at Journalists for Human Rights. And Journalists for Human Rights, by introduction, is a Canadian media development organization based in Canada. And what Journalists for Human Rights does is we train journalists across the world in the different programs that we work in. We train journalists to report on human rights issues professionally and ethically as well. And our approach to media development is really centered around training, but also providing long-term mentorship for reporters, sometimes in very difficult and fragile states to do so. In Kenya, we're running a project called Canada World, Voice for Women and Girls' Rights, and it's a program funded by the Canadian government through Global Affairs Canada. And at Canada World, what we do is that we train journalists to report on human rights issues broadly, but specifically we work with journalists to report ethically on women and girls' rights issues. So the idea is to amplify women and girls' voices. Our approach to doing this is we train journalists to report on women and girls' rights issues with nuance and with nuance, but also a part of what we do is also we work with civil society groups and we create synergies between media and civil society, to enhance data sharing between the two, because we know we have a lot of civil society, particularly women-led civil society across Kenya. So what we do is we create opportunities for journalists to have access to these civil society groups to meet in semi-formal or informal settings where we create networking opportunities between the journalists and civil society, and they get to share ideas or hear from the civil society perspective about issues that they work on in their communities. And journalists often, get to hear the realities of, pushing for women's rights, women's empowerment, women's development at community level. Often we've got journalists getting story ideas and that they later follow up and to report on from those communities. But beyond that, under the Canada World Program, we also support journalists and provide them with funding, a modest funding to report on these issues, because we do understand the financial constraints within newsrooms, that often these issues are not prioritized by the newsrooms. So one of the ways we try to support beyond just training journalists and providing mentorship is also that we provide them modest funding that caters for transportations and communication, and just to facilitate reporters to go out and report on issues that impact on women and girls' rights. And these issues, they're quite broad. It talks about gender-based violence broadly, and women's empowerment. When we talk about women's participation in politics, and how do we get more women, voices? Also, in the media, mainstreaming women voices in the media, cutting down on stereotypes and all of these factors to get more women voices, in a professional and balanced way. So in broadly, this is the type of work that we do. But because we've been working with journalists for the past 2 years, one of the things that we've observed is that there have been challenges when it comes to, we do receive pitches, and we realize that, there are challenges when it comes to pitches. And we've also been approached by several journalists that they struggle, with pitching, and they have great ideas. Generally, they have great ideas, but they struggle to communicate these ideas succinctly to an editor in order to convince them and get their buy-in to commission their stories. So this masterclass today is necessitated by that appeal from journalists that they need to sharpen. They need to sharpen their, hone their skills when it comes to pitching. But beyond journalists who are, currently practicing, who are currently within the setting of the newsroom, pitching is broadly a really important skill to have. The COVID-19 has actually intensified the constraints that newsrooms go through. A lot of newsrooms across the world, but in Kenya as well, a lot of newsrooms have cut down on their staffing, which means a lot of journalists have lost their jobs in the newsroom. Some who remain in the newsrooms are being forced to negotiate lower rates that they are being paid. So often, a lot of them have to resort to find other opportunities outside the newsrooms. They have to go to freelancing, and which means if you're going out to be a freelancer, you must be able to master your skills in pitching, because this is what this is the number one tool beyond your network. This is the number one tool that journalists have to use to reach out to editors often who don't know you. So the only thing they know about, you have to convince them through the pitch that you share with them. And if your pitch does not stand out, the possibility for you to be commissioned to tell a story is very, it's minimal. So today, we have partnered with the International Press Association of East Africa, IPAE, which used to be called Foreign Correspondents Association. You will learn more about those transitions very soon. But we partnering with IPAE to deliver this training masterclass on pitching. And the reason why we are going with IPAE, we work with IPAE, brings together journalists from diverse backgrounds from across the world. And most of these journalists are also freelancers who have honed their skills in pitching to editors, both locally and internationally. So we couldn't go with anyone better than IPAE to deliver this important training. So please permit me at this point to welcome Malcolm Webb, who is from the IPAE board. He sits on the IPAE board to make an opening remarks, to also introduce us to IPAE and of course on what they do at IPAE. Malcolm, welcome.
Thanks, Mustafa. Shall I put my video on? And
yes, please, you can put on your video. And just to see, Malcolm, you can also introduce yourself properly. I will do that, but maybe better you tell
please,
people.
Can the host enable the video? It's disabled.
Bernard, can you please enable Malcolm's video?
We can proceed as I address that one.
Okay, so
okay.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, no, I don't want to keep everyone waiting. Thanks, Mustafa. It's great to see so many people here today from quite far afield as well. It looks like we've got people from all over Kenya and beyond, which is great. So yeah, as Mustafa said, my name is Malcolm Webb. I'm the Deputy Chair of the International Press Association of East Africa, and I'm also a Senior Correspondent for Al Jazeera English Television. I'm based here in Nairobi, but the work for Al Jazeera takes me all around the region and beyond. Our Nairobi bureau covers East and Central and Horn of Africa and sometimes other places. But Mustafa asked me to tell you a little bit about the association, the International Press Association. So we are a professional association for journalists who are kind of working in or reporting on East Africa for international news media. We're based in Nairobi. We have a little office here, but we have members all over the region, members who are from all over this region and members from other parts of the world as well, who work across this region. Mustafa mentioned that the name change. It used to be called the Foreign Correspondents Association of East Africa, but a couple of years ago, the members and the board at the time decided that that name didn't reflect our membership and our vision, as well as the new one, which is International Press Association of East Africa. So that name change was executed in recent months. We run a number of programs. These are run by a board of about 8 members who are elected from the membership and also helped by some volunteers. And those programs include monthly social events. We normally meet at a cafe or a bar in Nairobi on the first Thursday of every month. Anyone is welcome to join. We run documentary screenings. They're usually held at the Alchemist in Westlands in Nairobi, and we actually have one this evening. I'm going to share a flyer in the chat. Anyone's welcome to come. It's free. And this evening we will be screening a film which is from, I'm just loading the flyer into our chat room there. It's called The Days of Cannibalism. It's a documentary about economic migrants in Lesotho. And I think it's a kind of story that also addresses the bigger story about the China-Africa relationship. So if you're in Nairobi at 7:30 this evening and you want to see that film, you're very welcome to come. We also do advocacy work for members and for other journalists, for example, liaising with governments or the diplomatic community to try and help people who are maybe in trouble if they've been detained, problems with accreditation and so on. We've been campaigning for a journalist in Sudan recently called Mohammed Suleiman, who's been detained without charge for quite some weeks now. I've just shared a link to one of our tweets on that. And if you're interested in learning more about the association, then I'm going to share our website as well. We run some training programs, including safety training, digital security, and other things for members. Okay, video, now it's working. Cool. It's great to be here. And then, yeah, we're delighted to collaborate with Journalists for Human Rights to be able to organize this session today. But I think that summarizes International Press Association and what we do. If you're keen to learn more, do check the website, or if you're interested in joining, you can read about how to do so there. And I guess I should pass you back to the capable hands of Mustafa and the rest of the crew. I now have to dash and work on a script for a story that we filmed on drought last week in Somalia. So I'm afraid I've got to crack on with that. So I can't hang around, but I hope it's a great session. I hope it's useful for everyone. It looks like it's going to be.
Thank you very much, Malcolm, for making the time to join us this morning and, took us to IPAE and, what you do, and also sharing links and also being generous enough to share the documentary that will be screened this evening. So for anyone here who wants to go and see this documentary, you're welcome to join IPAE at the Alchemist in Westlands this evening. Malcolm, thank you. A link to this recording will be up later, and then in the next few days you will have access to it, and hopefully we can all share it widely so people who are not benefiting right now may be able to benefit later from this. Thank you, Malcolm. All the best with your scripting this morning, and we will also pack with this this morning. Take care. Bye. So, colleagues, I guess we'll continue with this, and we'd like to thank Malcolm once more for his time, and for also they've been, Malcolm and they've been quite helpful in supporting this collaboration to happen. And I'm glad we actually having this today happening. So we won't waste time for now. Our first session this morning will be led by my colleague. She is called Mercy Muthoni Njowoge. Mercy will really just lead us to a really quick session to reflect back on some of the pitches that we've received at Journalists for Human Rights, and what worked, what didn't work in those pitches. And she will be highlighting some of those points. And the goal is for us to take note, particularly for journalists who've been working with us at JHR, who've submitted pitches over time. I hope you will pay attention to Mercy's reflections and then pick up a thing or two from those reflections. Just after Mercy completes, which will last for about 30 minutes, we will get on to another session, which will be led by two facilitators, to be co-led by Halima, Gikandi, and Gilbert. So both Halima and Gilbert are joining us from the IPAE. So please stay around for that. But for now, I would like to welcome Mercy to take us through the reflections. Mercy Karibu.
Mercy, you are speaking. Your microphone is muted.
Yes, thanks, Bernard. Clearly, you could see my lips moving, but you couldn't hear anything. So I just want to share my screen. Okay. Hope I'm not going to get any problems like I did last time, because I think I saved it somewhere. I can see it. Yes. Okay, so can you guys see my screen? Mustafa, Winnie, Bernard?
Yes, the document is opening.
Opening, yeah?
Yeah.
Can you see it? Bernard?
Not yet. It's still opening.
Yeah.
Not yet.
I'm starting to imagine, starting to think that sometimes it's my computer and it's not the user. Was able to see it, although I can also see the grid for the Zoom. Is it projecting now?
Not yet. Not yet. So it should be taking its time to open.
So Mercy,
now you know. Yes, Mustafa. Now you know.
Alternatively, you may have to email the document to me.
You already have it, Mustafa.
It is.
You already have it?
Did you send it already?
Yes. Bernard, what is it showing on your end?
I can see the folder where you saved all of them, the year 2022 folder. So you clicked on that document. Maybe you can double click it again, but it started opening. It has not opened yet.
Let me just close that again and do that. Because that's what I did, I double clicked.
Yes, alternatively, you can just share it again, then we can project it.
Yeah, Mustafa, are you able to, have you seen it on your email?
Not share it, please share it with Bernard so Bernard can help you project it.
Yes, I sent it last night. Okay, let me just do that now. Stop share first. I really didn't expect this to happen this morning, but some things are actually inevitable. So am I sending it to you, Mustafa?
Send it to Bernard, please.
Okay, to Bernard, fine.
We are there. It's here.
Yeah, it's there, yeah?
Okay.
Okay. Now, before Bernard tries to project it, let me try and share it again. Is this from my end?
It's from my end, Mercy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay. So first let me apologize for that hitch. It's called technology. And most of the times it gets the best of us. Now, I want to put my video on again. Bernard?
Yes, I think you can put your video on.
I can't see the button now again.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, now it's back.
Good.
Thank you. So, good morning once again, everyone. My apologies. I was having a bit of problems sharing my screen, but nevertheless, here it is. So I want us to, mine was to do a reflection of some of the pitches that we received over the last 2 years, because as my colleague already talked about how we give grants, modest grants for journalists to do some of the stories that they feel are going to create an impact in their societies. So, but over that period of time, we've realized that there's really a need for us to empower journalists more to have or to put forward pitches that really make a difference, pitches that are strong, because we feel like most of these pitches are very weak and they're not compelling to an editor. So, but because the nature of our project is that we have to empower journalists to write more stories, not the usual stories that we do every other day. So we realize that it's important to empower them on the component of writing pitches that are compelling, pitches that are strong, so that even when you're doing the story, you're anchoring your story on a pitch that has already given you a guidance on what you want, like the end product of your story. So that is why we came up with this training. And that's why this morning I want us to look or to reflect back and to look at the kind of pitches that most of the journalists who are attending this training this morning have already been trained by JHR, and some of you have also submitted your pitches. You may have received a grant to do your story, but in all fairness, sometimes we really don't know what to do because we feel like more could have been done to enrich your pitches. But then because we have to empower you more, so we have to give out the grants. So I feel like, I believe that at the end of this session, you need to have, you need to learn how best to put forward your pitches, what you need to do. If you've done a pitch, you also need to evaluate, look back and ask yourself, how did I do this? Did I do it the right way? Or do I need to improve on something, or do I need to change on some other things? So before we look at some of the pitches that we've already received before, I wanted us to look at what a pitch is, yeah? And the outline of my presentation this morning, I want to look at what is a pitch. You as a journalist, when you hear the word pitch, what comes to your mind? Yeah, and then Bernard, let me get the next slide. And then again, we also want to ask ourselves, why is it important? Why is pitching important in journalism? Yeah, why is it that as a journalist, you must write a pitch to an editor for you to be commissioned to do the story? And then moving on, we look at how to pitch a story idea. What is it that you need to do? How do you need to prepare yourself before you write the pitch? And what is it that you need to have before you do your pitch? And then it's also important to look at, successful freelancers who've done pitches. Most of their lives, these freelancers, they depend on pitching their stories to editors so that they can buy into their story ideas, and then they can commission the story to be done, and then the story is published. So we want to look at how is it that they have been successful in pitching their stories. And finally, we look at the good. I do want to say the good, the bad, and the ugly, but clearly there are some good pitches that we have received at JHR, and there are some really not good ones. So, I mean, just to put it in black and white, clearly there are some bad pitches. And when you get a bad pitch, definitely no editor would get interested in your pitch. So that is the outline of my presentation this morning. And before we move on to the next slide, I just want to jog your mind and ask, you can either put it in the chat, or just jot it down. When you hear the word pitch, what actually comes to mind? Yeah, because for me, when I hear the word pitch, there are very many things that come to my mind. And usually I don't like to give definitions in a sentence. I always like to give definitions using one word, because that, I believe, is what will stick with you. So when you hear the word pitch, what comes to mind as a journalist? Because for me, when I hear the word pitch, I think of ideas, I think of a story, I think of an aha moment, a pitch, aha, I have a story in mind. So that is what actually comes to my mind. And I also think about, there are stories that have already been told, but even as journalists, we are not really trying to invent the wheel. But again, you're thinking of, how can I present this idea, or how can I present this story in a fresh idea? How can I tell this story in a unique way? Yes, it's been told so many times, but how can I tell it in a unique way? So those are some of the things that come to my mind when I think about a pitch. And when I'm saying, or someone is saying, Lina is saying, she thinks about uniqueness, I know there have been stories recently. Okay, I think that was last year during the COVID pandemic time. And then there were these stories of teenage pregnancies, There was a lot that was being said about girls getting pregnant, yet they are so young. And I felt like that is a story that had been told so many times. But as a journalist, there is always that fresh angle that you can take and pitch, and an editor will buy your idea and run with it. So for me, next slide, Bernard. For me, when you talk about a pitch, like I said, for me, it's, just getting that idea. What is it that I look at this story and I feel like I can tell it better than it has already been told? Yeah, that is the idea that you have in mind, like to breathe new life into that story. And then even as you think of the idea and you think of the story, then the uniqueness and the freshness that you want put into this story? That is what you should always think about when you think about a pitch. When you see, say, sometimes JHR, we send out a call for proposals, and then we sometimes we give a direction, like we guide you on this is the area we want to focus on, but sometimes we make it just an open call. So you as a journalist, when you see an open call for proposals to write a story and you think about a pitch, you should think about the ideas, you should think about the uniqueness of the story that you want to tell. And then by thinking about those two ideas, sometimes you could be building towards an exclusive story, even without knowing. But when you present that to an editor, they will see that this is a story that has a potential of being an exclusive. So always keep in mind that your fresh idea, the uniqueness of your idea, Bernard, please don't move forward first. Your fresh idea and the uniqueness of that idea can actually lead to an exclusive. And that is what every editor is always looking out for. And I can tell you, if you land into an exclusive, that's like a gold mine. So an editor who sees that and identifies that they're going to have an exclusive, they're going to scoop other media outlets, they're definitely going to run with the story, and they're going to bog you down to send the story. So, and then again, when I look at a pitch, or when I think about a pitch, I think about presentation. How am I going to present this idea to the editor? How am I going what words am I going to use to convince this editor that this is a story worth telling? Yes, it may have been told before. Yes, you may have heard of teenage pregnancies, those stories on teenage pregnancies, teenagers girl teens who are probably not going to go back to school. Why? Because they're expectant. So how am I going to present that idea to convince an editor to buy my story? So it's important that even as you think about pitching, you look at the presentation. And here, when I talk about presentation, we all love food that's been presented to us in a good way. Like, I like to give an example of a cappuccino. I'm not a coffee person, yes, but I think cappuccino. You see, they put some interesting patterns, a love heart, and every time that cup is presented, that cup of cappuccino is presented to you, you already want to indulge. Even sometimes you walk out of you walk past a coffee shop and you can smell the aroma of the coffee, and you just want to walk in. Sometimes you probably had not even budgeted to have that coffee, but you just find yourself walking in because really you cannot resist the temptation of just taking that coffee. So I always want to tell journalists that every time you're thinking of writing a pitch, putting a pitch across, always think of the presentation. I know most of us here are Kenyans. Someone saying they can't see the screen, but just listen in, Lydia. So I like to give an example. I think most of us are Kenyans and we can relate to this. There's always been a joke going around of something called machakula, food that's just been put in there. It's potatoes, it's peas, it's carrots, and a lot of soup. So everything is floating. That food is not appealing to your eyes. Even you may just want to eat it because you're hungry, yes, but in reality, you're not enjoying that food. So a pitch is supposed to whet the appetite of an editor. Basically, that's what I'm getting at. Your presentation, the pitch is supposed to whet the appetite of your editor. Even before they get the food, that is your story. They should be able to have that appetite. So always when you're writing your pitch, make sure that you're thinking of how am I going to present this so that I catch the attention of the editor, so that this editor, even as they commission the story, they're looking forward to getting the story. They're looking forward to working with the story. Let me tell you about my experience. I have been a sub-editor for slightly over 10 years, and there are bylines I could see of stories, and every time I saw that story, I would just sit back, relax, edit the story, but really enjoy reading that story. Yeah, but there are bylines I would see, and I would definitely grab a cup of tea because I knew that one, it was going to really drain me. So what I'm simply saying is that you as a journalist, you should always be able to present your work to an editor and make it easy for them, because even this editor, when they are waiting to receive your story, they must be, you must create that excitement to them. So, and finally, when I think about a pitch, for me, it's just an aha moment, that's a light bulb moment, like, this is it, I'm going for it. And when you get that intuition that this is it for you, definitely, I mean, I don't see an editor who will turn your idea down. And for me, the aha moment is really generated by the fact that journalists, we know how we know how we know a story, we know how you identify a story. Journalists, we are told that we smell stories sometimes. Use your nose to smell a story. You can hear a story. Yeah, someone can say something. You can watch news, you can read an article, and you hear a story. Sometimes you can see a story. You can see something happening and you see a story in it. And sometimes you can even feel a story, either by touching it, or, we use our senses to get that aha moment for a story. So that, I mean, it's important to also put our senses into just identifying a story. And that way, you're going to, it's like you're having the building blocks to the pitch, and those building blocks to the pitch, actually, they end up giving you a really strong story. So by definition, a pitch, like we've already used just simple words to describe, is by definition is, just writing a short paragraph or about 500 words or even 2 paragraphs, so that you can convince the editor that there is really a story here. If it's a producer, you can convince them to publish your story and also to commission your story. And again, why you should pitch, it's important so that you encourage the editor or the organization that you want your story to be published in to use your story. Because there is one thing in you giving a very strong pitch, but then have you thought about the delivery of your story? Because you may give a very strong pitch, but then it becomes, when the editor receives your story, it's really like an anticlimax, there's really no story there, but the way you have presented your pitch really does not reflect on the kind of output that you've given. And sometimes it's really a disservice, because then sometimes your work may end up not being published. So it's a loss unto you as a journalist. And finally, remember that pitching is actually a skill that requires you to be as creative as possible. You need to be very persuasive in your communication skills, and you need to know how your story idea benefits the audience. That one, I must say, is like the apex of why you should pitch your story, because any editor always looks at, will this story interest our audience? Yeah. Let me just give you a brief example of a story that NTV did a few years ago, and it was the Red Alert. We all remember that story. It was done by Dennis Okari, I think, and he did a feature on, it was like an expose of how some supermarkets use chemicals to preserve meat so that it doesn't go bad. So, I mean, evidently, when you pitch a story to your editor and you tell them there's this, supermarkets are using chemicals to preserve meat so that it doesn't go back. They are looking at the profits, which overrides, the health of the customers who consume the meat. I mean, it will definitely generate interest to the audience, and the editors really look at, if it generates interest to the audience. Our audience are our viewers, are our readers, are our listeners. So when you attract more audience, of course it converts to what? It converts to revenue generation, because reality on the ground is that media houses are competitive. And also journalists, you as a journalist, you are in a very competitive industry. So always keep in mind that you're looking at the end goal. Even as you pitch your story, you're not pitching it for yourself. Remember that. And also you're not pitching it for your editor. Remember that. You're pitching it so that the editor can reach their audience, because the ultimate goal of any media house is to reach as a bigger audience as possible, because truth be told, it's a competitive industry. So now moving on, so why should you pitch? Why is pitching important in journalism? Because I just thought of 3 points. it's important to pitch because most of the time you want to give this story a fresh angle, you know, because stories have been told so many times, but you as a journalist, what fresh angle can you provide to the story? Yeah, if it's issues to do with, say, maternal mortality, child mortality, say in a certain area, in a remote area. I mean, you want to give a fresh angle to that. There could be many reasons for that. Maybe malnutrition. Maybe there are very many reasons that can lead to that. Maybe medical neglect, all that. But you as a journalist, you may see something that even as that story has been told over time, many journalists have not seen that. And that is why it's important for you to pitch so that you can bring out that fresh idea so that you're able to be commissioned to do that story. And then again, you want to breathe new life into that story, because some stories, they are told and overtold in the same way. And then again, unfortunately, we are in a period where, we find journalists who just want to tell what we call the he said, she said kind of story, you know? So sometimes by the time you're done reading that story, you're actually just feeling dizzy because you've just been reading he said, she said, he said, she said, but now you want to breathe new life into a story that really does not just tell us what they said, but it offers more information, it offers new information, it breaks down, sometimes it even goes further to break down and even provide data, for instance, you provide infographics, you provide information that really has been lacking in the telling of that particular story. So that is why it's really important. Pitching is really important in journalism. And then sometimes pitching, you can just be having a completely new story idea. And that is why you pitch a story, because sometimes you want to chart a new path, you want to walk into fresh waters, sometimes you want to do what we call you breaking down walls. But remember, there are times you can also get into a deep end. So as a journalist, you must be prepared for any eventuality, even as you pitch. And then now, so how do you pitch? Bennett, let's move on. So how to pitch a story idea? I mean, how do you nail a pitch? How do you get the attention of the editor? So we at JHR, what I know we've done, even as we send out the call for applications, we have a template. And you as a journalist, for you to make it easy for you when you're pitching your stories, it's important to also have a template. And the template enables you, it gives you like a guideline on what you need to look at, yeah, even as you present your pitch. So first of all, always have a template. And some of the things that you can capture on your template are most definitely your name. You could be new to this editor. Maybe it's an international, maybe it's Malcolm who was here just a few minutes ago. He probably does not know you. So you need to first introduce yourself. You need to even say maybe your gender if you feel like it's important for you. Which outlet are you going to, which outlet maybe do you work for? Yeah, but sometimes if you are a freelancer, definitely you'll say you are freelancing, you're not attached to any media outlet. And then you just capture the basic information about yourself. And then again, this template also enables you to give like an outline. You know, you can give you can propose a headline, you can give like a brief description or a synopsis of your story. Yeah. And then it just helps you to put into place the aspects or the building blocks of the story. So all the time as a journalist, always make sure that you have this template. You can generate one and use it over time, but sometimes you may have to tailor make it according to the story that you want to present to the editor. Then for you to be able to nail a pitch, for you to be able to convince this editor, always have an outline. Have a brief outline, or what you call a synopsis, a brief description of what your story is going to be about. That's really, really important, because then it already explains to the editor that this is what you expect, or this is what I'm going to deliver. Most importantly, as you do your pitches, or as you think about doing the story, who are you going to talk to? where is your information as a journalist going to come from? Because we know that as journalists, we depend on sources. And so you must first identify your key sources. And any editor would definitely send you out or give you the go ahead to do that story if you identify sources that, of course, create an interest to them. Sometimes these sources may be even known to the editor. Sometimes they may not be known to the editor. But it's important that the editor knows that this person is going to look for these sources so that they can give crucial information for their story. Then you can also provide technical and logistical details. This basically means that you can speak about when you expect to, say, deliver the story. And sometimes when you look at the logistical details, sometimes what is it that you need? Yeah, you can always point out that maybe you need facilitation for a certain movement, maybe you need facilitation for communication, and maybe you need even support. If even you're doing a pitch to go for an undercover, there are many things that you may require as a journalist for you to be able to deliver that story. So it's important that you also indicate there that you may need this, because we always say in journalism, there is no story worth dying for. So you must make sure that even as this editor is sending you out to go and pursue that story, there are things that you've already indicated to them that you may require support on. And that is why it's important in your template to capture the technical and the logistical details for pursuing your story. And then most importantly, we all must work with a deadline. We know that in this industry, time is of the essence. Time is a very key resource. So remember that always have a deadline. And a deadline for me here, I look at it in two ways. A deadline, you should look at it from the aspect of what time do I need to deliver this story. If I need, say, 2 weeks, if I need a month, if maybe it's an investigative piece and I need like 6 months, it's now upon you to look at, this is the story I'm pursuing and I need this period of time. Also, the other thing, you should also think, when you think about the deadline, you should also think about your story being relevant, your story not being time-barred. Because now, if you're talking about, say, for instance, you want to do a story on women's participation in politics, and then you give yourself a deadline up to September. Really, there's no one who's going to read a story about politics, say, after September. Now we just be looking at the outcome of the elections. But now, yes, it may make a bit of sense, yes, then, but is it really at the heat of the moment? So the thing here is look at the deadline. Always keep in mind the time frame or the window in which you're going to work on your story. Number two, when it comes to the deadline, even as you pitch, remember you're pitching to an editor, maybe not your line editor, but maybe an editor in another organization. So sometimes this editor may not respond to your pitch. And you really do not want your pitch to go and lie inside someone's inbox forever. And then your story idea just dies like that. So on the issue of deadline, when you're writing a pitch to an editor, it's also good for you to give this editor a deadline for them to respond to your pitch, and in most cases, if they're not interested, they'll definitely tell you they're not interested. So remember, when you're putting down your pitch, remember to give yourself a deadline on when you expect to deliver the work. And also, this person who's looking at your pitch, also give them a deadline on when you expect to hear from them. Because if you don't hear from them after the time you've given them, you're at liberty to share the pitch with someone else, with another editor. So always keep in mind that. And then finally, and most importantly, when you're sending out a pitch to an editor, it's if there's a provision to, you can put a link to your portfolio, stories that you have done before, because then that gives the editor like a front row seat on the work that you've done before, on your style of delivery as a journalist. Because most of the time, yes, a journalist, an editor may know a certain journalist, but maybe they have never taken their time to really understand how this journalist presents their work. So every time, always put a link to some of your previous works. Then again, that one may even sell you better. It actually strengthens your pitch. Now, I want us to move on to some of the some of the successful pitches that freelancers have. Some freelancers have, what they are saying about putting forward a strong pitch and what it has done for them. So these are just some of the tips from the successful freelancers. And what they are saying is every story proposal, you should think about how you're packaging it. Remember, I talked about presentation. Yeah, how are you packaging your pitch? Is it grammatical? Because editors get, they get sticked by very, I'll not say small, but they could look small, but they really matter. Because simple things like spelling, simple things like grammar, the tone of your pitch, they can either put an editor off or entice them to want to read your pitch. So always when you're packaging your pitch, make sure that you have checked the spelling, you have checked your facts, that your facts are right, because then by checking your facts, you're already telling this editor, I know what I know what I'm going after. I know that I know the facts to this story, and I have dug out the facts to this story, and I know that I will deliver this story based on this fact, because journalism is not based on hearsay. It's not based on rumors. It's based on facts. So if you want to write a story that is really life-changing, it will draw attention to your work, then you must get the facts right. Also, successful freelancers have said that you must include a brief summary or a headline, just a working headline to your story, because then it enables the editor to know that this is the story and this is what we are going to look at. Bernard, you've already skipped. I need that slide. So that it's important, because then it guides the editor to know that the story, say, is about teenage pregnancy, is about COVID-19 millionaires, for instance. So it's important because then the editor gets an idea of what your story is about. And then also you should explain why an audience would be interested in your story. I think we've already talked about the importance of always thinking about the audience when you're doing your story. You really do not want to do a story for yourself or for the editor. You always need to think about the audience, because that is the ultimate goal. And then I think the other tip is outline your main sources and the documentary evidence. Sources are very important. And remember, you must protect your sources. There are times when you're putting a pitch forward, you may want to, just let the editor know that these are my sources and these are the people I'm going to interview to get information for the story. But remember, there are also some sources who want to remain anonymous. So for you, it's important to also point out to the editor that I have a certain source, but they wish to remain anonymous because of reason A or reason B. Maybe they feel like their life is at stake. Maybe they feel that maybe they are not even authorized to speak to the media. So it's important for you as a journalist, even as you outline your sources, you're able to just establish or point out to the editor that I have a certain source, but they wish to remain anonymous. Then next, Bernard. Then the next thing, you can provide photos. You can provide photos if you have in visuals, and also be careful about you have you need to tell the editor about I'm getting a bit distracted. Okay, yeah. So you also need to look at reasonable time. You have to look. You have to have a reasonable time, and then keep it simple and focused. And then use a second and third or even a fourth eye when you're submitting your pitch. It's really important for you to get a second eye or second thought on what your story, on what your pitch is about, before you submit your pitch, because by doing so, somebody may identify something that you need, somebody may identify something that you did not see. So it's really important for you to pass it through someone else so that they are able to see what you probably did not see. So now I want us to look at the good and the bad, some pitches that we at JHR have received that we felt that there were really strong pitches, and then there are some which are not really as strong. So here we received a pitch from one of our journalists. And when you look at this pitch, this particular journalist, when they were told to briefly explain the story idea, they were able to capture things like the data. They are able to capture things like where they're going to get their information, because this particular journalist has talked about getting information from, say, Article 27 of the Convention on the Rights of Children, because this was a story on street children, specifically girls. So it's good that this journalist was able to already describe to the editor that there's already research that's been done, and there's already some human rights violation against these children. So already when you read the first paragraph, you're able to already conceptualize the story. So that I felt that was a very strong pitch, because then you did not struggle much to understand what this journalist wanted to talk about. And then this particular pitch is also based on the template that we at JHR use. So it looks at suggesting a proposed title for your story, which usually is a working title. You decide this is what I'm going to use as my title, but then the editor is at liberty to change that. And then again, you're asked to explain your pitch in one paragraph. Then the next slide, you look at Bernard. Then the next slide, you're asked to look at what problem are you trying to identify, and what solution are you going to provide. So for this particular journalist, she was looking at the violation of human rights of street children. And then they've also offered like a background on the topic. And they talk about the numbers of children on the streets. They look at already what the government is doing. So you see, they're already building their story even as they go about presenting their pitch. Next slide, Bernard. And then finally, for this journalist, she went forward and identified her sources, because she's going to do a story on street children. She said clearly there that she's going to speak to street children, and she was going to prefer speaking to girls. Then, of course, children rights advocates, and then representatives from the Labor and Social Protection Ministry. Of course, as a journalist, when you're doing a story, there are some challenges that you may encounter. So sometimes you can preempt some of these challenges. And when you're doing the pitch, it's important to sometimes highlight those challenges. And because you may need mentorship even as you are writing a pitch to an editor, it's good that you point out the areas that you think are important for you to get mentorship on, for you to be able to deliver the story. So Bernard, I want us to jump to the last slide. There was one more example of a good pitch, but it more or less speaks to, not the last slide per se, the bad pitches. I just want us to look at one of the bad pitches. Should be that, yes, example one, yes. So at least having looked at the good pitch, I want us to look at the bad pitch. And why I picked this particular example is because really from the suggested headline, the journalist goes to suggest a headline, and then there is no relation with what follows after that, because the suggested headline here is Voice of Women in Politics. But then when they go ahead to give a synopsis of their story, there is totally no relation with what their headline was about. And then even identifying the problem, you see it's also a problem, if I may put it that way. They were not able to identify the problem, they were not able to express themselves. And then if you also look at this brief, it's just like, I think, 2 sentences. Surely in 2 sentences, there's very little you can say to convince an editor to get to buy your pitch. And providing a background, that also looked to me like it was a problem. And they couldn't also put a finger on their characters, because when you're looking at the sources and your characters for the stories, I feel like you need to have first identified. These are not imaginary characters for your story, because journalism is not about fiction. These are actual sources that you want to speak speak to get information for your story. So when you write just something vague and something blank about a source, really there's no editor who's going to give it a second thought, because they'll imagine that already you don't know who you want to speak to when you're doing your story. And then the final one for this particular bad page. Bernard, are you around? Yeah. Yeah, please click on, no. Yeah, the continuation, yes. So, and then you see that this journalist also could not identify if there were any challenges that they were going to face, because you can't just put across a blanket, statement and just what we call victim blaming. You're just already saying that you're foreseeing challenges speaking to these people. So what challenges exactly? It's not like you've tried something and it has not worked. And then what I found interesting and that why this one stood out as a very bad pitch for me is because when you're asked to, when somebody wants to give you help, and then they ask you, so what do you need? You can't really throw the ball to their court, because when this journalist was answering, they simply said the whole process needs guidance. So which process? Because when you talk about the whole process, you could even be, when you say the whole process, you could even be indicating that you want the editor to write the story for you. So really that puts off an editor, and clearly no one would give your pitch a second eye. So, and now the final slide, Bernard. Just to finalize this. So clearly, I didn't do this presentation by myself. Of course, I got the input of my my colleagues, and from their end, these are some of the I think 5 things that they've also picked as they were reviewing some of the pitches that we've had before. So the first thing, they've observed that you have to identify and be clear on who to interview, and then to get the right sources. It's really important for you to identify the right sources. Then it's important for a journalist not to give a vague topic. You need to be very clear and concise. If you want to talk about teenage pregnancies, it's just not about teenage pregnancies. What is in it about teenage pregnancies? So don't make your topics vague. Then you also must follow instructions and ask where you're not sure. If you already have a template like we have at JHR, you must be able to follow the instructions. If you ask about the challenges that you foresee having, you need to outline those challenges. Just don't answer anything just for the sake of answering. So it's important for you to follow the instructions as if there's a template provided for you. And then avoid what you call victim blaming. There is no way you're going to pitch a story and you look like you're blaming a victim. Or if you're going to say to interview someone who has faced gender-based violence, there is no way you're going to pitch a story and depict them as the victims. I believe journalism should continue moving towards solution journalism. What solutions are there? How can we deal with this problem? And as JHR, of course, we train journalists to be very gender sensitive. We train them to report on human rights issues. So it's important for you, when you're doing the pitch, not to put the attention on your subjects. In this case, if it's a survivor of GBV, should not be perceived to look like you're blaming them. And then lastly, never lack statistics. Every time you're doing a story, never lack the statistics that you need. Because remember, our ultimate goal here is to write stories that create an impact. They change societies. Ours is not just to write stories that, they just report, he said, she said, he noted, he reiterated. No, that's not the kind of journalism we are advocating for. We're advocating for journalism that is life-changing, is society-changing. So every time you think about writing a story, working on a story, always ask yourself those key issues that we have talked about this morning. So we are really pressed for time. I would like to end it there. And I'll hand it over back to you, Mustafa. And I want to thank you everyone for your attention. And maybe Mustafa will open the floor for questions, or depending on you, you're the moderator. You may decide to do it now or later. So thank you very much for your attention, everyone.
Absolutely. Mercy, thank you so much for that brilliant presentation, which kind of open up, what we're about here today. And I hope everyone, is learning and probably maybe, getting reminders of some of the things that they may have missed during their pitching, processes. I will, I want to check for two things. One, we can, if anyone has a question now, I guess it's just better we do that so people don't forget. If you have a question for Marcy, you have a comment, please feel free to unmute and ask Marcy, or also please feel free to go to the chat and text your questions to Marcy there. Marcy will still be around anyway, so if you're not asking her now, you can always come back to Marcy to ask. It's now exactly 9:30, so Marcy, also you've done quite well with the time. We're doing well so far. Does anyone have a question for Marcy or comment to make? Okay.
Mustafa, I think in the chat, the very first question from Ami Moi was asking whether there is an image illustration on a story pitch that shows the template, the logistical details, and the portfolio. And I think maybe Marcy can just address that again, but I believe she did mention that we have a template. Back to you. The rest are comments here and there.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard. So what we'll do, because what Marcy has done here, Marcy has, demonstrated, giving us an introduction to what pitching is, and also spoke about some of the do's and don'ts in pitching generally. But importantly, also Marcy, kind of give us a rundown on the templates, the pitching templates that we've developed at JHR. And the idea of the pitching template is really to just guide the process. It's in a nutshell, it gives you like a roadmap of what sort of information that we are looking for. For instance, we want you to describe your story in a nutshell. We want you to speak about, to tell us who are you going to speak to for this story. And we deliberately also have there for you to mention challenges that you envision that might impact on your ability to tell that story. And the reason for that is that because most of the times from our side, we deal with very sensitive topics. So we wanted to engage journalists already through their pitch to let us know whether they are going to speak to a survivor of gender-based violence. And if that's the case, we will be able to, if we commission the story, we'll be able to support you through that process to make sure that, the whole process itself is done professionally. Diana's hand is up, so we'll take Diana's question before we proceed. Diana, karibu. Diana, if you are able to unmute, you're welcome. Okay, well, while we wait for Diana and others who have questions to ask, there's a lot of engagement on the chat box, and keep those engagements going. But we will now also like to move to Marcy, if she has any final thoughts before we move on to the next presenters.
Okay, thanks, Mustafa. I've just seen a question from Pauline Masharia. So she's asking, do we pitch stories only after grants have been advertised, or one can pitch and send anytime? So this one really depends. It actually depends, because most news outlets or media houses really do not have money ready for you to go to the field. But organizations like ours and many others, sometimes they have grants to do so. But ideally for you as a journalist, when you're pitching a story to an editor, usually you look at first sending the pitch to the editor, then the other details come after that. because it's until after they buy your idea, that's when they can tell you, oh, this is the budget that you're working with. So sometimes you really do not have to wait until a grant is advertised for you to pitch the story, for you to pitch. I hope I've answered you. Okay, I think Mustafa, I'm seeing a few other questions. Guys,
yes.
Okay, I think I just need to read through them.
Okay.
Okay, I've answered Pauline. So Carol is asking, could you explain further on the bit of impact of your story and how to measure impact? Okay, I'll talk about that and then impact of the story. So are there pitches that you consider too risky for journalists to execute? That is Cynthia. So if so, how do you advise one to work on such story ideas? Okay, let me first take those two. So the impact of your story, how do you measure the impact of your story? Most of the times, how I envision a journalist measuring the impact of their story usually is by the responses that you get after the story has been published. And what I mean here is when you've written a story or it's already been published, nowadays, because of the opening up of the online space, for instance, and then also media houses have invested very heavily on getting feedback on the stories that they send out there. So if it's an online story, they'll look at maybe the clicks, they will look at the feedback on the comment section, and they'll see what kind of impact the story has generated or what kind of debate it has generated. But then again, sometimes to measure impact, you'll see if you'll get, say, response. If the story is directed towards issues that maybe the government is not addressing, then you'll see the impact by getting a response, say, from the authorities, maybe from the government, from the authorities, if I may put it that way. And then again, it may also spark change. That is how you can measure the impact of your story. But then remember, as a journalist, really, you're not going to publish a story today and you see the impact tomorrow. Definitely, it will take some time. And it's really important that you keep tab on what impact your story makes. Then the other question was about the stories that you feel that are dangerous for you to pursue. What I can say about this is, even as you pursue a story, remember, top on your priority should be your safety as a journalist, especially because you work with female journalists, and most of us, because I'm still a journalist, we are very vulnerable. So remember never to put your life on the line just for you to pursue a story. There's no story worth dying for. But you can always get advice from an editor on how you can go about that story. If, say, it's an undercover story, they can offer you security, they can offer you advice, they can offer you even company for you to be able to pursue that story. So remember, do not put your life on the line to pursue a story. And then I think I'm just going to answer one more. Yeah, just one more, then Mustafa, I can hand it over to you. So this is Eddie Ashioya. Eddie is asking, what happens when you start writing your article and find a much different angle or a better one during the process? I think that's a really good question. This is what happens. Even as you've pitched the story and the editor has bought into your idea, remember, nothing is cast in stone. So even as you're developing your story, you're in touch with the editor. Of course, you're giving them progress on what is happening, how you're collecting the information, what are some of the challenges maybe you're facing. So this editor, even as they send you out to the field to do the story, they are also mentoring you in a way, because you must keep in touch with them. So sometimes you may find a different angle, which may even be more exciting than what you had already pitched. Or if you find that a different angle and you propose it then to the editor, they may tell you, no, let's go with the plan A. Let's not digress so much, because then sometimes they feel that you may miss the story. So remember, even as sometimes you're pursuing your story and you feel like you're moving towards a different direction, remember to always get in touch with the editor, and then they can guide you on what to do. Then I think you asked 3 questions in one. And so Elias, so your question relates to remote reporting. How do you pitch a story that doesn't become abstract or lacks human touch, as well as becomes too costly to make? I'm asking this because I'm an Ethiopian journalist based in Nairobi, but doing remote reporting on Ethiopia-specific issues. So I think your concern here is really about how do you pitch a story that is, you feel like it's abstract. As a journalist, we always know that it's important to work on stories that, what do you call it? Like stories that make, people can relate to. I'm lacking the right word for that. What is that word? It's gone. Like if you're talking about a story that is in Ethiopia, really that would make sense. Kenyans will relate to that story, but maybe if you're talking about something that's happening in, say, Yemen, how many people relate to what is happening in Yemen? So I feel like what you're trying to find out here is working on stories that you feel that are abstract. I'm really not getting your question here, but I feel like I'm going to open this up to even the other presenters. Maybe we can chime in.
I was exactly, Marcy. I was just going to say, for some of those questions, they will be they will be addressed by the next speakers as well.
Exactly.
So so don't feel pressure to answer all of the questions because also so some of them will be responded by the next speakers, and I'm also sure both Halima and Gilbert are here, and I'm sure the reason why it's important, Gilbert is someone with relevant experiences of what Elias is going through, because Gilbert is an older foreign African journalist based in Nairobi who has to report on issues affecting his home but other parts of the country. So Gilbert, has similar experience, and I'm sure he will respond to that point as well. But you are there.
Let's do this. I think let people just post their questions on the chat. Then I think we can do like the last round of Q&A after Gilbert and Halima are done with their presentations.
Fantastic. Thank you for that offer, Marcy. So I like the engagement so far on the chat. So please keep it going, keep asking questions and on things that you really need an answer on. But also if you have knowledge or experience in some of the questions that have been raised in the chat, don't leave them for the presenters. We all journalists here, we all colleagues in a way, with different experiences, with different backgrounds. So if someone raises a question or comment on the chat that you have an idea or experience in, feel free to share your own experiences on the chat. We appreciate that. I see Elias has come with a further question. Keep it coming. We will come back to those and respond to them as time goes. But please, all of still continue to stay with us and for the next session. For now, I have the pleasure to invite our next speakers, and that will be Amel Gilbert Bukeneza. Amel is a reporter, is a reporter and a member of the International Press Association of East Africa. He's a journalist, he's an author. Amel primarily reports for French media in Kenya. So he does report a lot for international press, but focusing on the French media. I hope I'm not getting it wrong, but Amel comes from Burundi. I hope I'm right. Amel, am I right? Yes. So Amel is a Burundian journalist based in Nairobi. So I hope I have a pleasure to introduce him to you. And we also have Halima Gikandi. Halima is also here live on screen. Halima is also a journalist, a Kenyan American international journalist, also based outside in Nairobi, but also do report for international media. She particularly She currently serves as the African correspondent at The Wall, the largest international news program on American Public Radio, which is usually NPR. So we have both Amel and Gilbert here. What they're going to do is to continue the conversation on pitching. So you will find out some of the things they're going to talk about. Will reinforce the previous presentation that was already done by our colleague Marcin Juroge, who has of experience on her belt as a reporter, journalist, and also an editor in Kenyan media. So you realize there was a lot of context within local media from Marcy's Mutonin Juroge's presentation. I'm now pleased to invite both Amel and Gilbert to lead us through the next session. Keep asking your questions. If you have a comment to make and you want to unmute, feel free to do so, because we will also appreciate to hear your voice. Feel free to unmute and intercept Amel and Gilbert. Amel and Gilbert, I will pass this on to you. Karibu.
Halima?
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can get this. Okay. Can you see my, I think it's loading. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Awesome. Great. Thank you everyone for joining us. And especially for the freelancers out there, anyone who's trying to jump into international media. I know it can seem very daunting. But I just want to start with a word of optimism. Is the current program so let me go. This is us. Thank you so much for the introduction. I just want to give a word of optimism to begin with. Is before I got into this current position I'm in 2019, I was a freelancer for a number of years. And while preparing for this, I had to look back at some pitches that I'm not that proud of. So it takes time, and the more you do it, the more you pitch, the better you'll get. And another reason for why pitching is important, because it helps you establish relationships with editors. And actually the reason I have the current job that I have now is because an editor I had worked with as a freelancer pitching sent me the job, and I hadn't seen the job posting, and she vouched for me in this position. So that's an example of how the pitching that you do as a freelancer can also help you get staff positions potentially, if that's your goal down the line. Okay, so the elements of a strong pitch. And again, if anyone has any questions, or they can feel free to put them in the chat or interrupt me, or if you need a point to need to clarify something, or Imelda clarify something, just let us know. So the elements of a strong pitch, I think a simple way to present this is the 5 W's. If you remember in primary school or secondary school, when we're learning to write essays, that's how they frame it. So I thought that could be a helpful way to understand this. So the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, and why. Simple enough, right? Who, you need to introduce yourself to the editor. Sometimes I'll receive pitches from freelancers and they just immediately start with their story. And you have to think, wait, who is this emailing me out of the blue? So remember, when you're reaching out to an editor, and if that's your first time reaching out to them, you need to let them know who you are before you pitch your story. And one thing that this also helps with is it gives confidence to the editor you're reaching out to, that oh, this is a real journalist. It gives them an opportunity to look at your prior work and to kind of judge whether you can actually deliver the story. So let's say if you're a Kenyan journalist whose background has mostly been in local media, you can share examples of the prior work you've done, and that gives an editor confidence. Oh, this is a journalist who might be new to international media, but they're not new to journalism. So you want to answer, who are you? What's your professional background? Where are you based? What is your prior work? These are all very simple questions that you should answer when you're introducing yourself and pitching an email. And here's kind of a general format. So imagine that this is an email, and the subject line, I'll put pitch, exclamation point to get the attention of whoever I'm pitching to, put the subject of the story, which we'll get into later, but low voter registration ahead of Kenya's presidential election. And then the opening line, Matthew is actually my real editor in real life. So dear Matthew, I put a random name. My name is David Guara, and I'm a freelance print journalist in Nairobi, Kenya. That answers who you are, what you do, where you are. I cover breaking news in the region. I'm writing to pitch you a story about. Very simple. This is an easy template to replicate, and it's a good way to start off the bat with because editors are reading so many emails, they can't be guessing who's emailing me. And as we all know, we often are getting spam emails. So this is a way to distinguish yourself from everything else that's all the other emails that editors are getting. A tip is share your portfolio or website if you have one. And I think that's especially important if you're a photojournalist or a video journalist, because that allows somebody to quickly click and see your prior work. And that gives so much confidence to an editor that, okay, this person actually does the work that they're trying to get me to pay them for. If you don't have a website, then you can provide links to prior work at the bottom of an email, especially links that are relevant to the story you're pitching. But I do advise you to set up a website. Coincidentally, I just updated my website, so I'm going to give you an example. This is my website. Click on it. I'm a radio journalist, but sometimes I have to take photos or videos for my work. It's good, especially if you're a photojournalist, to give a link to either your website or an Instagram that has your work so they can see, oh, wow, this is really good. I would love to commission work from this person. Again, I'm radio though, so I put most of my radio stories here. It's kind of slow to load. And the reason actually I updated this is because I'm also, on the side, always keen on getting more work opportunities. And so I thought, okay, let me update my website. But I highly encourage that. And there are a lot of different website platforms that you can use, some that are free to easily kind of put your work together. Okay, what is the story you're pitching? So sometimes I see pitches that don't actually say what the story is about. And I understand that. I've made that mistake too. I mean, a lot of times we're thinking about the stories for so long, they're sitting in our head for so long. So we think, oh, this must be obvious, but it isn't. Remember, assume the editor you're reaching out to knows nothing about the subject. And you want to make sure you're actually pitching a specific story, not a topic or a theme. And this is a mistake that I definitely was guilty of when I started out as a journalist. But here's an example. A topic would be like gender-based violence in Kenya generally. That's not a story. A story would be, this is hypothetical, Kenya's government introduces new controversial laws to counter gender-based violence. Right? That has a sense of timing, a sense of news, a sense of something happening. That's a story. And if you're unsure, you can chat with other people before you pitch, or you can look at headlines to stories to get a sense of, okay, when I'm reading the paper, when I'm listening to the BBC, how do they present? What is the actual story? You also want to tell your editor what type of story you're actually pitching. Is this a newsy story? For example, on Friday, there's going to be a huge international conference in Nairobi. I'd like to do a news story about it. Is it a feature story? So kind of a longer story about bigger issues? Is it an in-depth investigation? Tell the editor clearly so that they know what you're talking about and what you have in mind to deliver. Also, you need to let the editor know what is the format. This again sounds obvious, but sometimes I'll see people pitching and they don't actually clarify whether they're planning to deliver whether they're planning to deliver a radio story or digital story or video story. And it's important to say this up front again, so editors know what all the information is. Finally, do your research and pre-reporting if needed. So an editor wants to know, is this a feasible story? For example, we all have big dreams of the types of stories we'd like to do one day. But if you're pitching an investigation on CIA secrets, do you actually have the sources, the documents, the research to back that up? Or is this kind of, oh, one day I would really like to work on it? Because ultimately, again, think of pitching as like a first date or a job interview. You want to give confidence to that person that you can do what you're saying you're going to do. So if it requires more research, sometimes it requires pre-reporting. For example, if a story is about, I would like to interview or President Kenyatta, Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya. Do you have access to interviewing him? Has his office agreed to interview you, to let you interview him? Because if not, you're kind of pitching something wishful. So do any necessary research you need to do before you pitch. That said, be careful about already doing the reporting for the story. There is a difference between pre-reporting to get kind of required information to give confidence to what you're pitching and reporting the whole story and doing all of the interviews. And that's a mistake I made when I started out. I thought, let me do all of the interviews and then pitch. But that I realized doesn't really give editors an option to be part of the process. So sometimes what can be good is if you're pitching a story that's tied to specific sources, I'll reach out to see if they're available to an interview, but I won't necessarily do the interview before pitching. But these things, it depends, and it's a case-by-case basis. So here's an example of an email format. Again, there's a subject, the pitch. This is saying exactly what the story you're pitching is about, which, as was mentioned in the previous slide, that can change. We all know things change as we're reporting, but a pitch is, this is the idea of the story I would like to do. So low voter registration ahead of Kenya's presidential election. That is a clear story, right? And that is a story I did, and I think other outlets did as well. A difference between that and a topic would be low voter registration, right? That's the difference again between a topic and a story. So in the sample email, Dear Matthew, my name is David Guara. That's the introduction we spoke about before. The next line could be, I'm writing to pitch a radio story about Kenya's low voter registration ahead of the upcoming presidential election in August. That is crystal clear. It tells the editor why you're writing them, because again, it might be obvious to you, but remember, we all receive emails out of the blue, and you don't want the editor to have to think a lot about, okay, why am I receiving this email from somebody I don't know, especially if you don't have a prior relationship. Crystal clear. What am I pitching? It's a radio story. What is the subject? What is the story? Kenya's low voter registration. So again, be as clear as possible. Where do you want to pitch your story? So there's so many international publications and news outlets. There are also regional news outlets like the East African, SABC in South Africa. So one is, remember, international media does not just mean Western media. There's also CGTN, the China news outlets. In Europe, there are news outlets, in the US, but also in Africa and the continent, there are outlets that take pitches from the region. But that doesn't mean every place is going to be a good fit for your story. And that took me a while to realize. For example, let's say you have a gender story. You might not want to pitch that to, let's say, an environmental publication, unless there's an environmental angle, right? You want to make sure that the outlet is a good fit for your story. And one way to find that out, very simple, is go on the website of that outlet, look at the prior stories that they have published to see if there would be interest and to see if that's a good fit. Another example, there's an outlet that I pitched to, I think my first successful pitch as a freelancer, Times. It was called Times Higher Education. So it's a small publication about what? Higher education. So I wouldn't pitch a story about primary schools closures in Kenya, because that's not higher education, right? It's not a good fit. Also, make sure you wouldn't want to pitch a video story if you're a video journalist to an outlet that only does print or radio. That's something I see a lot, or I get questions. People ask me, "Oh, hey, Halima, can I pitch this written story?" Sometimes it will already be written to your outlet, and I say, "Well, no, because while we do have online versions of our stories, these days we only accept radio first stories." Or other people will say, "Hey, do you guys ever do video?" And I have to explain, well, no. And you'd know that if you looked at our website. So you want to show that you've done at least the bare minimum research into that outlet. And the easiest way to do that is go on their website. That said, many outlets, as we know, have, like the Washington Post does both text stories or print stories, and they also do video stories, right? So there are many outlets that are multimedia. Do your research. Do your research again about the outlet you're pitching to, because if you don't, it makes it seem lazy. And it doesn't mean you are lazy as a journalist, but that's how it looks. And does an editor want to work with a lazy journalist? No, just like, would we want, we all would want to hire somebody who seems like they take the basic initiative to actually research that outlet. One thing to ask is to see if they take unsolicited pitches. That means, will they take cold call pitches or pitches from people they don't know? I think many outlets do, but again, most outlets will, if you scroll through their website, will have a section for pitches, or they'll say, we don't take unsolicited pitches, but I think most do. Another question to ask is, who's the right person to send pitches to? Again, look on the website. Many websites for outlets will have a section where it will say, oh, for pitches, send to news at or pitches at blah, 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 this outlet. So do that research if you can. What format do they want to receive pitches? Again, sometimes on websites, they'll have those kind of ingrained kind of sections on their website where you can just upload the pitch. Other times they may want it as an email. Again, the way to set yourself up for success is following directions, because that gives confidence to an editor that you're going to be a journalist who will follow directions. Now, a lot of times outlets will have their own guidelines for pitching, so follow them on social media. Because I see a lot of outlets will post on social media, oh, hey, we're looking for this type of pitches. Oh, actually, another point on, here. Yeah, where do you want to pitch your story? You can start small, especially if you're just starting out as a journalist. There are many outlets that take international stories. You don't need to go straight to CNN or the New York Times. Look around, do your research, look at where other journalists are posting their stories. Again, my very first story I was successfully pitched as a freelancer was at the Times Higher Education, which I'm sure none of you have heard about because it was quite a small outlet, but that helped me then pitch to the next place, then pitch to the next place. There's also kind of specific subject-specific outlets like Rest of World, which is a digital online publication, and they are looking for stories about technology outside of the US and outside of Europe. So if you have an interesting tech story from Rwanda, that could be a good place to look. And I do think that more places are interested in stories coming from Africa that are about technology or about the economy or about the arts and culture. There are plenty of small arts magazines. So expand kind of your horizon. And to do that, Google is the best way to look that up. And connect. If you can't get your answer that's about how to pitch and whom to pitch to through research, if you've done all of that research and you still don't have the answer, ask your contacts. Most journalists are pretty easy to access. the International Press Association of East Africa, which we're a member of. It's a great network to join and to expand your contacts. Oftentimes we have WhatsApp groups and you can easily message, hey, is there anyone who works for, I have a story about this. Is there anyone who works for BBC or who works for wherever who can advise me on who is the right editor to pitch to? So that is something you have control of. We all have control of our networks and of our contacts. Also, when I started out as a freelancer, I remember when I was traveling, I met with an editor in person, and I think that helped give them that person-to-person context of who I am. And I think after that, I had my first successful pitch with that person. Now we're all busy. We don't all have time to meet for coffee, but again, it could just be your friend who works at this outlet that you're messaging and saying, hey, do you think this is a good fit for your outlet? Or who can I pitch to? Note, as we all know, podcasts are getting big, and there are a number of American podcasts that I see that look for international pitches. So when you're thinking about where to pitch to, expand your horizons in terms of the places. Again, it doesn't just need to be the New York Times or BBC or CNN. And now I'm going to hand it off to Gilbert.
Thank you, Halima. Can you hear me very well, guys?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to apologize. My English is 50-50. After listening to the sweet and beautiful American English from Halima, now welcome to a broken English from Gilbert. This is an interesting masterclass. Thank you to Mustafa, Othone, and Bernard. It's special for me because talking about pitching here, I've had my background. Now I'm in Kenya. I'm from Burundi. Burundi don't speak English. We speak French. I found myself in Kenya, where I'm brought to write stories in a country. I remember when I arrived here in 2017. Yeah, yes, I speak Swahili, but my Swahili was also very bad. English I can't even say. So I had so many challenges to go through, but I managed. So who knows? Maybe one of the attendees here in this masterclass tomorrow, maybe he will find himself or herself in a country where the culture is totally different, and he's doing a story where he doesn't even, or she doesn't even understand the language of that country. He need a fixer, someone to help on the field. Yeah, so this is an interesting session for me to interact with colleagues from Kenya or maybe around the world. So when do you plan to file your story? It's important to let editors know when you expect to file your story. That depends on the type of story as well. Yeah, I think when you in the pitch, of course, you need to say when you are in your plans. I think Halima has already said according to which type of story you are going to write. It can indicate you if it will take you 1 week, 2 weeks. You need to go on the field, maybe. You need to take contact. You need to make some research, to go through some reports. So you have an idea if it will take you like 1 week or 2 weeks, and you have to specify it and fight to respect the deadline you gave to your editor. Yeah. Next, Halima. Can you go to the next? Yeah. Why is your story important or relevant? You need to give context about why the story is important and relevant. Breaking news is a big story like natural disaster, terrorist attack, election. That's obviously important. Yeah, and I think also when it's about breaking news, it's also important that your editor knows that he or she can rely to you. They don't need maybe to go or most of the time, the editors will prefer to go and buy an article from news agencies because they already have contract with those news agencies, rather than make an order for a story to freelance. So I think most of the time, the winning pitch for freelancers are those feature stories where you take time. For me, most of my winning pitches are about those stories that news agencies don't talk about most of the time. Yeah, and consider their audience and the other type of work they publish. Very important. For me, for example, I write for French international media. So you can imagine when I have the same story with someone maybe who have suggested the same story, but he's working, let's say, on Burkina Faso or Mali, and me, I have suggested the same story maybe on Kenya. Kenya will not read the story because Kenya did not read French. French people, maybe they're interested in Kenya, but I think they are most interested in what is happening in West Africa, French-speaking countries, more than English-speaking countries in Africa because of historical reasons. So you have also when you are pitching to consider the audience. So that is why, like me, for example, I have to really convince my editor when it's about an English-speaking country, rather than working a country that speaks French, because when it's about the country that speaks French, you have the guarantee that people read the story. There's no issue of audience. But it doesn't mean that when it's a story about a country, an English-speaking country, that they will not take the story. That is where a good pitch comes. You need to convince your editor that is an important story, even if there are issues of audience. It's really an important story to take. Yeah. Next, Lima. Why is your story important or relevant? An important story in Kenya might not be relevant to, let's say, to New York Times. True. Maybe I remember one day I made a pitch. Can't remember very well the topic, but the answer was, we think that's good for local audience. That was the answer that they gave me. They told me that we think that is an internal matter that maybe will not interest our audience, our international audience. So you need also to think about think globally, even if you are Kenyan or Burundian, I don't know, to put yourself in the shoes of of a French or an English person who will read the story. Will the person understand what we're talking about? Yeah. Consider language. General French, I have spoken already about it. Consider language. General French outlets like France 24, RFI are going to be interested in pitches from Francophone African countries. True. You can persuade outlets that a local story has a global and regional angle, or why the audience needs to know about it. Exactly. It's about how you pitch it, how you convince your editor. Yeah, exactly. Tips. Include other story in the hyperlinks so that editors can read up more on the subject. You can always ask editors what type of stories they are looking for. don't hesitate. If you are in doubt, don't hesitate to text to your editor. I think it's better to ask rather than to make something wrong and then maybe to give a story and then your story is rejected. You see, it's I think it's also a sign of maturity. If you don't understand something, if you have something to ask, a clarification, ask. Yeah, thank you. Next, Halima. Yeah, this is an interesting experience. I think it was last year. Tips for perfect your pitch. Check grammar, spelling, and facts. If your pitch looks messy and unorganized, the first to get in the trash bin. Yeah. I think it was last year. It was a Switzerland-based media, which was looking for a correspondent in Kenya, in Nairobi. Someone gave my contact to the editor. So the editor got in touch with me. It's an international media, but it was for the French section. So I was excited for that job, but I made a mistake because I didn't know the person. He didn't know me. The first job from me, it was to impress him that I can do the job. And the person who gave my contact to him, it's a person who knows me, who know that I can do the job, but the editor didn't know me. So I made a mistake. I just forgot an S to his name, just an S. So because it's about writing, it's not a radio or a television, it's about writing, that cost me the job. So the editor was worried that maybe I will not really do the job correctly, how he's expecting the job to be done. Then I lost my job, the job. So I had no competitor at that time, but the editor had to look for another person to hire. So that is, especially when you are trying to make contact for the first contact with the editor, the first email, how you present yourself, how careful you are, how accurate you are when you are pitching, facts, grammar. This was about grammar, just one word. I forgot an S, then I lost my job. I lost the job. It was not yet my job. Yeah, so especially when it's the editor really doesn't know you. You have to be very, very careful in details. Details will build that relationship with the editor, or those small details will make that you lose maybe the credibility in front of the editor. Next. Tips to perfect your pitch. Ask someone to review your pitch. Exactly. I think when you have written something, that is from my experience, you can read your own text 10 times and fail to see a small detail, a small mistake. You have read and then read again, you are sure it's perfect until you give it to someone else to tell you, hey, look, did you see this? And you are surprised. Yeah, always, it's wise to give your pitch to someone else, maybe a colleague. If you are like you are trying, if you are new, in working for international media. Maybe it's, if you have a friend who already has experience, it's really good to give to that friend, to give you some feedback. How does the person see your pitch? Yeah, etc. Short and sweet. Keep your pitch brief. Most of the time, I think most of the time, a very long pitch, it's a sign that maybe yourself, you don't know what you want to write on. Maybe the topic is still blurry in your mind. So it brings you writing so many things. And remember, international editors, they have like 20 emails from different parts of the world of people who are submitting their pitches. So he really doesn't have time to go through a very long text. He has to be, you have to keep his attention maybe with your first line or second sentence. So if your pitch is really not short, there's many chances that you are, the editor will not really spend time even reading it. Pay attention to format. Keep it clean. You can send yourself the pitches first to see what it looks like. Yes. If you don't hear back, you can follow up. Exactly. I think it's in your right if you send an email and 1 week, if it's not breaking news, 1 week, you haven't get any feedback. And also be careful. Don't harass the the editor, but just follow up. Just follow up. Maybe he didn't open the email, or he opened and then he forgot to respond. Yeah, it's good to follow up. Next.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in. I think that's important because, as we know, we're all busy. As I'm listening to this great presentation, I'm thinking about like the hundreds of emails I've forgotten to respond to. So it's good to do, I think, 1 or 2 reminders. If you don't hear from them, you can assume, because sometimes editors don't respond back to you when they're not interested. I wish they would just let you know, but they don't always.
Thank you, Halima. Next. Yeah, I think Halima, you can continue. This is for the radio, so.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't do video. But for radio, typically, if I'm pitching a story, I'll include a short line about what in radio we say are the scenes I plan to have, the type of audio and sound I'll collect, the people I plan to interview, just to give a good example of, okay, where am I actually going to collect sound from? So here's an example. I'm staff. I'm a staff with my outlet, but even as a staffer, you have to pitch. Your editor doesn't just sign off on every story you want. And sometimes there are things I pitch where the editor says no. But here's an example of a pitch I had, like the tail end of a pitch I had sent to my editor. And at the end, because I couldn't fit the whole thing here, at the end I included, okay, who are the voices I want to include? Okay, and this was a Ngugi wa Thiong'o's recent play, I Will Marry When I Want, which I just did a story about. So include, okay, I'll interview maybe the director of the staging, or the actors, people in the audience, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, if he's available, etc. And then, oops, let me go back. And then ambi, which ambient sound. Okay, I'll include some sound from the play. I'll include the audience, the applause from the audience, etc. So if you're pitching for radio, it's important just to give those examples of, okay, what will this actually sound like for radio? Or let's say if you were a freelancer in Zimbabwe, pitching a story about like coronavirus and in public places is spreading. You may want to include, okay, one of the places I'll go visit is a market, because then the editor will know that, okay, we're going to hear sounds in a market that will be really nice, or sounds on a busy street. So those are things to include, to consider if you're pitching for a radio story specifically. For video, I'm not a video journalist, but I assume you would want to include, okay, the type of B-roll you plan to collect. Again, at first, if you're, again, a Zimbabwean journalist or a journalist in Zimbabwe, this is really just a random example, who's a video journalist proposing a certain story, you may want to say, okay, I'll interview business people at a market, or just generally to give an example, okay, of what this video story would actually look like. Okay, so I see there's some questions. This is a good question we can answer now. From Thomas. What approach would you use to pitch photo story ideas to international publication? That is my strong beat on photo storytelling. That's a good question. Sadly, I'm not a photojournalist. So one thing I would encourage you to do is reach out to photojournalists who work with international media. There are many of them, if you're based in Nairobi, many of them, they may be able to help you more. What I would assume is that, yeah, I just don't know the answer to that question. I would assume, yeah, the first thing to do is network, also network with the wire providers, to get a sense of, okay, when can I pitch to you? I do think there are some publications who do take photo stories, but you'd have to look at which ones do that. But if you're more of a news photojournalist, then I would network with the different outlets, etc. But I would encourage you to find somebody, a photojournalist who has more of an answer, unless Gilbert has some suggestions. Does the pitch have to need to have a hook and a punchline? So yes, we're actually, Claudia, we're about to get into examples of some successful and unsuccessful pitches. So I hope that will get to that question. Anything else in chat? Share. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so moving on, we have some examples. I can start with this one. So here's example number one. This is just a screenshot of the email I sent in, in April 2018. This was after many failed, I can't even tell you how many failed pitches I had. I used to write pitches that were like an essay of 400 words or 500 words, but we all grow and we all have to learn. And that's part of being a journalist, right? Is failing and learning from it. This one, you can see in the to section is that I researched, I had this idea of, this was at a time where there were all of these lecture strikes in Kenya. And I had heard that. And so I tried pitching it around to different outlets that I thought might be interested in education stories. So that's how I came across this publication called Times Higher Education. I went on their website. I saw they have an email that you can send submissions to. So I sent it. Now, this is not a perfect pitch, but just to give you an example. And the format can change, right? But good morning. Once a university strike begins in Kenya, no one knows when it will end. For the past 3 months, a nationwide strike to increase lecturer wages has left thousands of students in limbo. Internships have been postponed, diplomas paused, and wallets left empty in the case of students who rely on campus jobs for a living. For students, this is an unfortunate reality of attending university in Kenya, where strikes can happen a few times a year. My name is Halima Gikandi, and I'm a freelance journalist and producer in Nairobi. I'm in a great position to write a feature-length story examining the near habitual strikes in Kenya's universities and its impact on students. I'll follow up on this pitch in a few days. Best, Halima. So this was my first successful pitch. I think as a freelancer, I think what helped with this is it has the 5 W's. You can all look for it. Just the format's a bit different. I used to put my information at the bottom. My name is Halima, that introduction. These days, normally I put it at the top, which I think works better, but you'll find your own style. But I would say, actually looking back, I should have put that introduction here at the top. But it says once in the what, begins in the subject. In Kenya, lecturer strikes leave students in academic limbo. That is the clear premise of the story, or excuse me, the clear story that I'm pitching. It says a story. This I think kind of assumed that it was that I was pitching a text story, not a radio story. So I think that was clear. Yeah, I say my name, I introduce myself, that's the why. One thing I didn't include is the when. So sometimes you don't always have to. I know I put when, what are you pitching? It really depends. I think it's better too, but if it's, one thing I'm kind of putting is the now, right? Is it in theory, I think what's kind of assumed in this pitch is that I'm pitching a story about university strikes that are ongoing. So I think it's kind of assumed there that I'd want to do the story now when these strikes are still happening, as opposed to after they end. But looking back, yeah, that's something I could have included, which wasn't explicitly here. Let's see, I see somebody raising their hand. How do I, actually, I don't even know how to, somebody raised their hand. I don't know how to get.
So I think when someone raises their hands, we just let them go. I see Tava's raised a hand here. Tava can, if you're ready for it, Alima, she can go on, they can go on and speak. Yeah, okay, Tava.
Go ahead, Tara.
Tava, if you're speaking, you're muted. We can't hear you.
And no, like none of these are really perfect pitch, but this was a pitch that was successful.
So I guess Halima, we go on while we wait for Tava to unmute. Tava, if you're having trouble unmuting, maybe let us know through the chat so we can fix it. Thank you.
Mustafa?
Okay.
Mustafa?
Yes.
Does attendees have the possibility to unmute themselves, or one of the hosts has to unmute?
I assume they should be able to unmute. They should be able to unmute. I have asked her to unmute. She hasn't. Probably she has a challenge, but they should be able.
Okay.
So we'll move on for now.
Okay.
Here's another example of a pitch that I sent. This was not successful because I think that's helpful to also share examples that weren't successful. So hike, this is really long. I mean, the fact that I don't even feel like reading it, I think might indicate that it's a bit long. And I think Gilbert was 100% right. If you find yourself writing very lengthy pitches, it might mean that you're not actually ready to pitch because you're not quite sure what the story is. But this pitch was I was pitching the US midterm elections from an international perspective. Again, what I would do differently here is, so I started with the subject. I put links, which I think is helpful, especially if you're quoting a statistic or a survey. It's important to include that link so that an editor can go look it up later. The thousands of miles away from DC, one of America's most underrated voting blocks is awakening. I think I wrote that to try to give this hook, which somebody had asked about. And especially if you're pitching a written story, yeah, you want to show a bit of flair or a bit of mastery, I guess, of language. That's a bit less important if you're pitching a radio or video story. But over 3 million Americans living abroad are eligible to vote in federal election, but according to the latest government survey, blah, 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 blah. So looking back, I mean, that's important information, but I don't until the end say, introduce myself. I have an error. I put my aim. I meant to write my name, Halima Gikandi, et cetera, et cetera. I think another mistake is that I had said I already conducted some interviews for this article. This was from many years ago. Yeah, so I think looking back, what I would do is I would put my introduction at the beginning, because otherwise, if you're just reading those first few lines, and I can say this now when I get pitches, I would assume this is like a PR pitch from somebody trying to pitch their experts. I wouldn't actually assume it's a journalist. So I think that's another reason looking back. And for most of my pitches these days, I actually include my information, who I am, Yeah, and at this time, I don't think I had a website, so I didn't put a link to my website, but if I did, I would have put a link there. So this was, I never heard back. I think I followed up once or twice, but I never heard back. And I think also what's missing here is a sense of, I don't remember when I pitched this, but a sense of when I'm actually planning to deliver this story. So again, this was an unsuccessful pitch, but I never got an answer about why. Now I can just assume why. Here's another pitch from 2019. This was a successful pitch in that I got the story commissioned and delivered on it. In the subject line, so this is again a screenshot from an email, in the subject line, online sports betting on the rise in Africa. That is a very clear pitch, very clear story. I wrote the editor. So this was not my first time interacting with the editor. I think this was my first story for an American radio program called Marketplace. So that's why I'm not introducing myself, because now the editor and I already know each other. But if this was my first time emailing her, then I would introduce myself. So this is a way to pitch people you already have relationships with. I told her I'm writing with another pitch from Kenya, this time about the rise in online sports betting, etc. So very clear what. She already knows the who. So here then I go, and sometimes it's good to break up paragraphs just to make it very clear. I wrote this long, let me go back, this long paragraph about, okay, online sports betting is on the rise. So Marketplace, this outlet is more of an economics story. So if you're pitching a story that's based on something you're saying as a fact, which is online sports betting is on the rise, then you need to also give links to show that that's true. So that's why in these hyperlinks, and under rise, I probably included a link of a report or of a survey that shows that it is actually rising there. So if you're making claims and facts, make sure that they're actually true and that editors can now look and find that information. I put some stats here. Normally I don't put a lot of statistics, but this isn't, again, this outlet was more of an economics outlet. So I thought that would be important for them to have those numbers to see how big the story was. By the way, this was a successful pitch, but I still had an error. As Gilbert says, sometimes you look over these things a million times, but your eyes just don't catch things. So don't be hard on yourself. It helps to have somebody else look. If you can't spot the error, it's here highlighted, circled in red. I said addition. I think I meant to write, but concerns about addiction. But I don't think the editor noticed, or if they noticed, they didn't care that much. And so at the end of the story, I say I'm going to be who I'm planning to interview, which again is important for radio. I don't need to put I'm writing a radio story because that's assumed. And based on our relationship, as she knows I'm a radio journalist, I'm pitching to a radio outlet and I've done other radio stories for them. But yeah, putting, okay, who am I going to interview? What type of audio am I going to be collecting? Okay, shops where people gather to bet, etc. I noticed also in this pitch, I accidentally repeated the line at the bottom that I repeated here at the top. But maybe it just read as emphasis. I doubt it was intentional, but none of us are perfect. You just do your best. Here's another one. So this is from a recent pitch. Let me move to the bottom, I guess. So again, even if you have become a contractor with an outlet or staff with a news outlet, you still have to pitch. I have to pitch to my editor all of the time. Sometimes the longer you go with an outlet, even as a freelancer, the better sense you have for which stories they're going to accept. This is very unconventional because it's not a first-time email. This is internally within our system. So I'm not putting who I am or where I am because my editor already knows that about me. But this is still an example of we still have to pitch even when you have developed a relationship with an outlet. And I still use the same tools. I say, okay, Ngugi wa Thiong'o's band plays, returning to Nairobi 30 years after being banned in Kenya. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o's famous play, I'll Marry When I Want, will be performed in Nairobi starting next week. So giving those details, I still have to do that within my own outlet. And I put, because it's radio, okay, who are some of the voices I plan to include? That's important again for my medium. And it's also good just to give the editor a sense of what will this story look like, but things change. Sometimes you don't get access to people, or sometimes you get a different idea. So it's fine for things to change. Again, the purpose of a pitch is giving an editor a sense of what the story is going to be. All right, okay, now I'm going to hand this over to Gilbert.
Yes, thank you, Halima. This is an example of one of my successful pitches. And it's important to notice that this is a translation as I write in French. So if you see any grammar mistake, maybe it was during the translation. So here it was about, even now, when I read this pitch, I'm really proud of it because it was straightforward, and unfortunately I couldn't find my first pitch for an international media. This was one of my editor, and this time we knew each other, so it was not my first pitch for this media. So I went straightforward. So as you can see, yes, I read, of course, hello Marilyn, the UNHCR just stated that Burundian crisis, the most funded crisis in the world in terms of assistance to refugees, who number around 3,066 scattered throughout the countries of the sub-region, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and DRC. The announcement comes a few days after the almost total failure of the dialogue between the government, the opposition. As a result, in the refugee camp, it's a double punishment. No hope of being able to return soon, and the living conditions are becoming more and more precarious with this lack of assistance. This paragraph, everything was in this paragraph. 6 lines. So the first line was I introduced the everything from the first line, and it just took me 6 lines to give everything to pitch for the story. The following was just my suggestion if I have to do 2 different stories, because I started to do different stories in 2 different countries, but after the decision was to do 1 story in 1 country, a story that shows the dual issue of the refugee who can't go back home while starving in the refugee camps, because the Burundian crisis was the underfunded in the world. Yeah, this was one of the good pitches. This is one of the good pitches that I made, which goes straightforward, without no stories around. The following example, Halima, can you go to the next?
Actually, quite follow-up question, Gilbert, because this is really interesting. So with the outlet, can you kind of explain about then how it worked once this was commissioned? Did they give you pay your expenses to go to the camp? And why do you think they trusted you to do a story that includes traveling to a refugee camp?
Thank you. Those are important details, because I remember I worked for an international media which don't pay freelances for travels. So you have to do your stories. It's up to you when you travel, it's up to you. And yeah, for this one, when the story was accepted, when the pitch was accepted, so what I did, because they already know me, so there was already that relationship between me and the media, so which is also very important to build the relationship with a media, even if you are a freelance, you don't have contract with them, but it's very important to really build a relationship based on credibility, show that you are a professional. If you go on the field, you don't say you have slept in an hotel, in a 5-star hotel, and then try to, I don't know, to fake bills or receipts. You see, those are very important details that maybe will indicate if you are a professional or not, or also will contribute to build that relationship with the media. Yeah, or if you travel, you say, I have traveled in first class, business class, you see. Yeah, so they accepted I went to do the story in Uganda. And what happened, I used my money, but I was refunded. So most of the time, what they do, you have to keep all the receipts to prove what you have spent, and then you are refunded. That is what most of the time they do. But sometimes they are flexible when there's that relationship, that good relationship that you have already built, that relationship. You can tell them, listen, this is a good story, but I don't have money with me. You can give me money and I will justify after. I will bring receipts of everything later. It's a discussion that we engage with the media. But this is based on the relationship that you already have with the media. So it's very important. Yeah. And yeah, I did the story. I think it's one of the good stories that I have made with that media. Yeah, it's Le Monde, for those who know Le Monde, French media. Yeah. Yes. Next. So this is one of. This was a bad pitch from me. I wrote it, but till now when I come and read it again, I ask myself, how did I do this? Yeah, and it's not something done 10 years ago. No, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, something, or last year. So hello, not too long ago, there were fears that the East African community would explode against a backdrop of economic and diplomatic political conflict. For political conflicts, there was Burundi and Rwanda on one side, and Rwanda and Uganda on the other. On the economic side, there was the trade war between Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, coupled with some dislike between the leaders of the regional powers, notably between Tanzania and the president. The arrival of a new leaders, the new president in Burundi and Tanzania, cannot forget the DRC, seems to be bringing a new wind of hope to the region. Burundi is in the process of reconciliation with Rwanda. Samia Suluhu wants to turn the page of Magufuli's relations with Kenya. Tshisekedi is friendly to Kagame. Hope is reborn in the region. I was thinking of a decoding paper with different regional sources, analysts, diplomats, etc. Surely, when I look at it again now, I ask myself, was I really able to write a story on this? I don't think 5 countries, 6 topics, different, economic, diplomatic, I don't know. So I think I didn't myself take time to tighten the pitch or to give it an angle. Yeah. And then this cost me, yeah, it was of course rejected. Then I went back to it, I read it again. I told myself, surely, how could I even, was it really possible to make a story on this? So the subject here is very wide, very, very wide. I think it's worth maybe 3, 4, 6 stories, 6 different stories. Because it's about many countries, many subjects, of course, that are related. But my job was first to sit down and take time and to give to this story an angle, a very specific angle. Yeah. Of course, as I said, it was rejected. Yeah.
So thank you for that those examples. We've all done it. We're all guilty of it. And it's fun to look back at. Oh, this is a good question. Okay.
But there's a question here.
Yeah.
Exactly. Someone is asking, Gilbert Halima, do you have a pitch that was rejected, but you felt still had some meat and then went and they worked and was accepted? I don't know you, Halima. I think I have some, but I can't find it right now.
I mean, one thing it's hard if you don't have a relationship with the editor, then they don't really have a reason to want to work with you, like rework something, you know. But I think it's easier when you've developed more of a relationship. Yes, there have been times with editors I already had a relationship where I sent them a pitch, and sometimes then they'll ask other questions just to figure out whether they really want to do the story or really to get a better sense of the story, even within my own outlet. I pitched a story the other day, and I don't think it was kind of fully developed. And so one of my editors wrote me some questions and she said, hey, can you consider these other questions and come back when you have the answers for them? So that does happen. I think it's easier when you already have a relationship with the outlet. Other times, I think there's one American radio that I pitched to where I think the pitch was fine. It's just that their own journalist was going to work on the story. So I just kept pitching other stories and they also didn't accept. But then there was a big news event in Nairobi when the Dusit terrorist attack happened. And I pitched again, just like, I'm here, I'm going to the scene, I'll be there, I can do a radio story. So simple. And that got accepted because they needed that. And we'll get into later kind of some of the many reasons that you can send a good pitch and it's still not accepted. And then another question from Elias. Is there anything else on that question, Gilbert, that comes to mind for you? No.
Which one?
I think for that, is there anything else you wanted to add on Eddie's
No,
question?
No, it's fine.
You should really try your best if it's a first time, like any first time impression, to do your best. And if you feel like as you're writing it, sometimes the pitch just isn't ready. Sometimes you have to do more research. But even the process of writing a pitch is helpful for me to as I'm writing this long essay, to realize, okay, here are the parts of the story that are interesting, but it doesn't mean it's ready to send out yet. Another question from Elias, a different question from Elias. When pitching a story for a particular media outlet, do you keep the same story pitch format even when editors are changed, or do you adjust the story pitch format with each new editor? In case you feel the new editor doesn't understand your pitch, do you CC on an email to your previous editor, or will that cause a bad relationship? Keep the same story pitch format. I mean, I think, so if I assume what you're saying is, for example, let's say you're pitching to BBC, and if your editor changes, I mean, I think you have to use a story pitch that works for you. As you've seen in the previous examples, my format has changed a lot over the years to something now I think works better. So that's up to you. I think what's most important is to make sure you're hitting the 5 W's, as we mentioned, and that it's concise, it's to the point, etc. if the editor has changed, I mean, your new editor is your new editor, right? And every editor is different. They all have their own backgrounds. They all have things they're interested about. For example, my editor at my outlet, there are certain things he's really interested, certain topics he's really interested in, which another editor might not be. So every editor is also different, but the person you're working with is the person you're working with, right? Like your editor is your editor. It doesn't matter if like a correspondent at the outlet really loves your story. If your editor doesn't, then that doesn't really matter. Having good, Sheila says, Sheila is saying, yes, having good working relationships is good. How do you go ahead?
Halima? Yeah, I think when your editor has changed, don't put him in CC when he's no longer in that service. That might raise questions from the new editor and maybe will cause some troubles for you. So, as you said, editors are different. I have worked with editors that maybe they will call you, they will give you a phone call if they don't understand something. Others will just email you. So you have to adapt. You have to understand that editors are different. And I think when pitching, the more you spend time to understand and to work on your pitch, I think you will not have so much problems. You will not have again to argue, again to defend your pitch. Most of the time, problems come when you pitch and yourself, you didn't take time to make some research. You didn't take time to understand your topic. You didn't take so enough time to work on your pitch.
Yeah, those are great points. I see another really good question, Gilbert. How do you go about the issues of the editor having a different perspective to your story that would affect how you want to execute and bring out your story? What do you think, Gilbert? How do you deal with that?
The question is, how do you go about the issue of the editor having a different perspective to your story that would affect how you want to put and bring out? I think first you have to agree on the pitch before you go to do your story. So you pitch. If he has questions or she has questions, he asks. And then you agree on what you're going to write on. If there are some changes raised during while you are on the field, for example, you have to inform your editor. So I think you have to be on the same understanding on if there's a good communication, of course, between you and the editor, which is also the key when you're working for international editors. So I think the communication is the key. You have first to agree if you agreed on what you're going to write on. So, and you go on the field, for example, I think someone has asked this question, and then you see your story is taking another trajectory. You have to inform the editor. If the editor also is suggesting something else, I think if there's that relationship of talking, you discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, communication is part of this job and disagreement is not as normal. It's not part of the issue. I think being respectful and being communicative is the most important thing. And after I answer this, I see somebody's raising their hand. Feel free to just chime in. But disagreement happens. Yeah,
Halima,
go ahead.
Maybe just as you and Gilbert respond to that question, and in the context of the grantees we engage with, I think there is also the issue that sometimes the grantee feels because we assign the mentors, so someone feels like the mentor is trying to bring some other angles that he or she had not thought about before, and that becomes uncomfortable for the grantee. So I think you can address that one as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that perspective. What I would say is get used to that difference, right? It's normal because we're different people. For example, my editor comes from a very different background than I do, as I'm Kenyan American. I have roots in this continent. He's American. I don't think has ever traveled to Africa, and I'm the Africa correspondent. So by virtue of our different positions, we'll have different perspectives about things. And actually that can be great, and to have different perspectives on our stories, right? Because sometimes it can even hurt us as reporters to be too close to a subject, but that also gives us an advantage because especially most of the people here are African journalists. That experience you have, let's say if you're from Karicho or you're from the coast, then you really have those insights that are valuable. That said, having outside perspectives is important too. Disagreement is part of the job, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. For example, yesterday I was editing a story that aired about this Kenyan mountaineer who came back to Kenya after summiting Everest. And just as we're going through the script, there are like a lot of mini disagreements between my editor and I, and they're not bad. It's you'll just have, oh, what if we move this here? Or what if we put this subject here? Oh, I'll say, that's a good idea. Or, oh, I don't really like that. So part of the editing process itself is constant agreement and disagreement. So first, I would suggest rethinking the way you view that, as it doesn't have to necessarily, disagreement on its own doesn't necessarily have to be conflict. So also as the reporter, I would say it's important to be open to different perspectives. That said, there are other times where I think, especially as African journalists reporting on our continent, we may have different views in terms of the way we're reporting a story, or that's maybe different from historically the way the region has been covered, the continent has been covered by Western media. So I think it's also important, if you feel very strongly about something, or the way somebody is written about, way something's written, etc., then also to fight for that and explain in the best ways that you can why you think it's important to do things this way. But ultimately, we have the power as journalists, from the sources we decide. For example, for me, my goal for my coverage is to always center African experts, whether I'm doing a story on coronavirus or extremism or whatever. So even just by the decisions of who I interview, that's already shaping how the story is going, for example. And that could be very different from, let's say, an American journalist who is only interviewing like white experts, right? So like you do have a lot of power and very different ways, from very subtle ways in terms of how you're shaping the coverage. Finally, if there's something you really feel is, for example, let's say you and your editor disagree about a source and about how to talk about that source, and this is really for you important, you can always back out. If the disagreement is that big and you can't convince the person otherwise, then you also have the right to leave with your story. Okay.
I think also quickly, there's something also to keep in mind. Sometimes, or most of the times, those international editors, you will find them, they have been like, if you are reporting on Africa, also they have been in Africa for quite long. There are people who have been reporting on the continent maybe for decades. So maybe also them, they really understand the context. They don't think because of he's based in Europe or in America, he really don't know how to go on, or he ignores the context. So this big media sometimes also they are aware of that. So they will not put someone who really don't know, who know nothing about the region that he's working on or she's working on. So keep that in mind. Me, sometimes I found myself, my editor is also suggesting me, is also giving me contacts that I don't have, but he's in Europe. He's giving me contact here for Kenya, for Uganda, for different countries, because he has been working here for 10 or more than 10 years based here. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, exactly. And our editors also have experience that is valuable, and it's collaboration is part of this job, and it should be on both sides. Okay, so I'm seeing now there's some other questions. Let's, I think, finish through the slides quickly, and then we can try to tackle the rest of the questions. We have about 30 minutes left. Okay, let's see what else is on here. This is really important, as Gilbert and I have been discussing, as a bit is building and maintaining your relationships with editors. The stronger relationships you have with your editors, the more likely pitches will be accepted. So that editors want to know that you're reliable. There are freelancers who I have heard stories of who they say they'll do this, the deadline passes, you never hear from them again, which I understand why. As freelance journalists, sometimes you get scared. You suddenly something has changed. You're afraid to communicate that, but leaving will actually just give you a bad reputation, and you shouldn't expect for an editor who's relying on you to want to engage with you again. So it's important to be genuine with the editor. They're not on the ground. It's easy to make assumptions. So communicate. File on time when you're saying you're going. File on time when you say when you've decided to, or when that decision has been made with the editor. We all make mistakes. I remember when I started out, again, I didn't know how to communicate. I didn't know that there was an option to communicate changing deadlines. But the reality is, we've all been there. We understand there are a number of reasons, even on my day-to-day job, where deadlines have to move. The important thing is communicate with the editor as soon as you know, and ask them. Sometimes, especially if it's broadcast, they may have already set a time in the broadcast schedule for your story to air, right? So if you change that on them without proper notice, that's really going to mess them up. Other times, especially if it's a print or a digital story, it can be published at another time, but the point is to communicate with your editor. You can say, hey, this is taking me longer than I thought. Is it possible to extend the deadline to next week, right? So do not ghost your editors, otherwise it's unlikely that they won't want to have a relationship with you. That said, if you do a good job on your stories, those editors will say, when they see a story, let's say in Kenya, this happened to me. They said, when I was a freelancer, they'd say, oh, I know Halim is a good radio freelancer. Let's see if she can do the story. So you'll get to a point where editors will message you with story ideas to see if you can deliver, because they know that you're reliable. Honor the ethics. We know that journalist guidelines on ethics vary around the world. So I suggest you check those journalism guidelines for every outlet, or if this is your first time reaching out to American outlets, get a sense of what those guidelines are, because they differ sometimes with, for example, Kenya. For example, in the US, journalists, you're expected to not pay your sources, or to receive money from, let's say, if like the Ministry of Agriculture is hosting an event, you would never be accepted to, you would be accepted to not take any money. Whereas in Kenya, oftentimes attending press conferences for Kenyan journalists, they know sometimes you're given maybe 1,000 shillings for appreciation for attending, or to cover the costs of transportation if your news outlet isn't covering it. So this is not a debate right now about what's appropriate. It's just acknowledging that there are very different standards. And so when you're starting to work with international media, be clear about that, because you never want a situation to happen where you've just published a great story and then somebody says, oh, I saw this journalist getting money from this organization, and maybe you thought that wasn't a problem, but now that will get you in a lot of trouble with your outlet. And if you don't know, communicate with the editor. Finally, pitching might lead to a job. And in my case, I think 2 stories I pitched eventually led to me getting a job that I hadn't even seen advertised. So these relationships you build and maintain with your editors, essentially they're like your bosses, right? They're important and they can have an impact on your career. Gilbert, do you want to add anything?
I think while we wait for Gilbert, I think you've just raised a very important point here, Halima, on the ethics, and keeping in mind, and I'm glad you also quite mentioned that, they are not all set on stone. So the dynamics are different between Kenya and South Africa or anywhere in Europe. In our shape, for instance, there was a time it was even a local newsroom that we worked in. We had colleagues who went out in some village telling some really important stories. And the chief of the community and other elders of the community appreciated that those journalists were able to tell a story that brought the attention of the government and other authorities to fix the road. So they decided to gift the journalists. Two journalists that worked on the story, they were gifted with like a chicken and a goat, and they came back to the city with this gift. And the editors found that this happened, became a big problem. It became a big problem. You're not expected to accept any gift from the people. So I think we worked with other colleagues from other media houses where it was fine. Yeah, and this is the same country. It was it was acceptable. So I think the point Halima made about understanding the media house you work with and the standards that are acceptable within your media house, particularly if you are interested in venturing out to work with international media, you have to be really pay keen attention on the ethical standards that are acceptable there. Because it could happen, what Halima said, someone could just go on Twitter with Twitter today. Your media house in Europe is happy to share a beautiful story you've done. And someone will just go onto Twitter and like, oh, by the way, this reporter, we are all together in this, we all signed for 3,000 shillings each. You're in big trouble.
Yeah, exactly. So communicate. If it's with international media and you don't know, skew towards not accepting something and say that. I've had to say, or if people ask me for things or for money or for food, etc., I've had to say, unfortunately, I can't due to my job, but good luck. There are different ways to say things, but communicate with your editor if you're not sure, because for what you want, in one context, it can be gratitude. In another context, somebody can say is paying off your sources, right? Or you being paid off as a journalist. So the context is different and it varies culturally and in different work environments. So communicate always. Gilbert, unless you have anything to add, I'm going to move on.
Thank you, Halima. Just to add that in this job,
No, go ahead.
Here, in this job, it takes years to build your credibility, but I was saying in this job, it takes years to build credibility, but if one mistake, one tweet can destroy it, and you have taken 10, 15 years to build it. So you have to be always careful. And there's always people who will try, they will never say it like this, but they will try to give you maybe to influence the way you write the story. And you have to be very careful and sensitive to these things. Yes.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a great point. And it's also reminding me, this is a big difference I've noticed sometimes in Kenyan media versus international media, is sometimes in Kenya media, you'll find like a politics reporter at one of the newspapers who's also on their side hustle working as a PR person for a politician, which in US media, that's a huge conflict of interest. It might be fine in your Kenyan media, but in US media, absolutely not. That will get you fired. So these are things that you might not have thought about that can really influence your credibility, even if you weren't setting out to make a mistake. Similarly, if you're doing and pitching an investigation into let's say financial mismanagement in wildlife NGOs, and you're also being paid to do their PR on the side, that's a big conflict of interest. So research, and if you have a question, then ask the editor. Another thing is how are you being paid to do the story? For example, especially right now because of the drought in Somalia, different organizations might be paying for journalists to facilitate the costs to travel, and every outlet has different standards or different decision-making processes about what NGOs or what UN organizations can pay for you for the costs to do your reporting. That differs a lot. So again, communicate with your editor and be upfront, because rarely will you get in trouble for communicating upfront. You will get in trouble for not communicating at the end. Moving on. Quickly, rates and payments. Every outlet has its own payment rate system. Rates vary a lot, but one thing that's important, especially for freelance journalists who really are living story to story, is determine the rate or payment before you begin working, and make sure you have an understanding and agreement on when you will be paid after filing, because that depends. Some outlets take 3 months to pay you, some take 6 months, some take 2 weeks. And that also varies in terms of how good the outlet is at doing international payments. As we know, some countries in the region, it's hard to receive payments on via Western Union. So have that discussion up front. Kenya is a bit easier, but if you're in Sudan or South Sudan or Ethiopia at times, that can be a challenge in terms of how you get paid. So I would encourage for people who are really living story to story to always put that question out at the top. Also leverage your networks to figure out what the rates are. Ask your friends, ask other people in your network, hey, what did you get paid for this work? Because that can help you kind of try to get the most out of whatever story you're doing. Be upfront, as Gilbert has talked about whether there are expenses you will be paying for or whether they will be paying for. That varies a lot too. And it also depends on the relationship you have with your outlet. Many outlets do not pay, let's say, transportation costs for freelancers for your matatu or train ride, but if it's a bigger expense, it just depends. Finally, ask around whether the outlet's pay in a timely manner, because I've been paid 6 months later, 3 months later. I'm just eagerly eating githeri until I get my paychecks, especially for freelancers, is communicate that and have an understanding of that, because you might find out it might not be worth spending all of this time on a story if you're not going to be paid well for it, or if you're going to be paid 6 months later. So these are just things to think about. More importantly, the more you pitch, and Gilbert, let me know if you want to add anything, but the more you pitch, the better you get at it. If you do require funding for your story, you can always pitch, let's say you're based in Dar es Salaam and you want to travel to northern Mozambique, to Cabo Delgado, to cover what's the situation there. You can pitch to the outlet first. And you can say, hey, this will require funding. I'm interested in also applying to a reporting grant from an organization like the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. So you can always say, okay, communicate about where you plan to get funding from. Don't give up. It takes time. There are a lot of reasons why even the most perfect pitches aren't accepted. One, internal budgets for freelancers, especially during COVID. For many outlets, their budgets for freelance work went down. So it may have nothing to do with you. So don't be discouraged by that. Two, there might be a staff employee working on a similar story. That's happened to me. Be wary of getting into the mindset of, oh, they copied me. No, a good staff employee is also paying attention to the news, and ultimately, if they're able to do it, they will be chosen over a freelance journalist. Why? Because that costs less money. Editors also, they might be very busy, overwhelmed with the staff employees, and may not have time to work with freelancers, even if it's a good story. Finally, it might just not be a good fit for the publication. Internally, newsrooms are always making decisions and thinking about, okay, their coverage, what they want, etc. So it could be a perfect pitch and it might not still be accepted, so don't take it personally. All right, so now this is for the rest of the Q&As. There are people raising their hands. I don't know how to pick you, so please just jump in with your question. Otherwise, Gilbert and we can go back to the chat.
I see Nubu's hand is up. So Nubu, maybe
you can unmute. You can unmute and speak.
Okay, we're still waiting for them. So there's one question in the Q&A for Damaris. How do you pitch a solution-based story and make it unique? That really depends. I mean, not every outlet wants a solution-based story. Some outlets just want the news with no solutions at all. So I think that is very much determined by who you're pitching to. How to make it unique, look at what other stories have been published, look through the website of an outlet to see what they've published, because you might pitch this great story. You think, this is such a good story. As you're typing it, you feel really good about yourself. Then you look on the website afterwards and you see they've already done this story. So that's how you make it unique, is see what else is out there and what hasn't been done. Okay, that was answered. Okay, from Yvonne, I think sometimes challenges occur when you have straggle harvesting for a story in rural areas, a story that is human interest, and you are sure it will run on air or get published, then boom, your editor ignored it. It is indeed sad, especially for us correspondents who depend on such stories to gain a living. And when you try to ask why you don't get responses from the office, what are you advising? I'm not 100% clear on whether your editor has already agreed to do the story and then ignores it. If that's the case, that's very unfortunate. Then for me personally, I may decide not to work with that editor again if they themselves are not responding to me. Generally, you have to make a calculation though about how much work you're putting into a pitch before it's been accepted, right? Put a bit of work in, but don't do the whole story or travel if you don't for sure have a place to place it. Make sure you have it agreed in writing that this is going to be accepted. Still, there are times where stories are killed for whatever reason. There's sometimes you can negotiate a kill fee with an outlet, and which means if you've started working on it and then they decide no longer to run it, you will still get a certain amount of money. So that's something to bring up, but it really depends on the outlets. And again, if it's your first time working with an editor or an outlet, do your research, work with other people who have worked with that person to say, hey, are they good to work with? Are they good with freelancers? Is there anything I should be worried about?
Okay. Halima, there was an earlier point raised by Elias, and I would like to read it so we address it. He says, how do you pitch a story that doesn't become abstract or lacks human touch, as well as becomes too costly to make? I'm asking this because I'm an Ethiopian journalist based in Nairobi, but doing remote reporting on Ethiopia-specific issues. And I think he kind of like add more. He said, when I say about making it abstract, I'm talking about how to make it interesting to Kenyans and other non-Ethiopians, not something that only Ethiopians can understand and be interested in.
Yeah, I think going back to the earlier slides, it's a lot of research. I mean, if you're freelancing for, let's say, the East African, or it depends on your audience. If your audience is Kenyan, then there might be stories that are more related about trade issues with, for example, how the conflict in the north could impact trade with Kenya, or how if there's an influx of refugees, or if when President Kenyatta travels to meet with the prime minister, like those are stories that would interest a Kenyan audience. Or whenever the Kenyan foreign minister talks about Ethiopia, right? Like that would be more of a Kenyan stories geared towards a Kenyan audience that you can pitch around to local or regional audiences. But other times, I mean, when I've covered Ethiopia for my outlet, which is American, I try to think about, if the audience is American, I try to think about one, it's a big news story, at least just the conflict in the north. So in general, that's going to be of interest. Sometimes it's a quick news update, right? That's not personal. That's okay. Other times I'm pitching longer human interest stories about the experience of war, or et cetera, or stories about refugees that are longer and more human interest. So it depends on what story you want to do. It depends on the audience for that outlet. So that I think that's the best I can answer that question, because really you have to decide what are the stories you want to do and whether that's a good fit for the outlet. Sometimes news stories are very quick. Other times, if you're pitching a longer feature, then find outlets that would want those longer feature stories.
Quickly, Halima, for our colleague from Ethiopia, I think that is an issue that maybe other colleagues encounter in their work, me included. Sometimes you even fail to see the how to say the regional dimension of an issue. An issue can appear like local, but it has like a regional dimension, and we fail to see it. When you make, that is why maybe it's very important to take time to think about your pitch, to make some research. Then you find maybe an angle that can interest an audience beyond your country.
Yeah.
It might be maybe like a shortage of food in your country, but it's not only maybe farmers are struggling with the harvest is not enough in your country, but maybe what you ignore is that your country export food in neighbor countries. Maybe it's affecting the entire region. So that is also what you have to do in your work when you are looking for like an audience beyond your country. Think about the regional dimension, the global dimension of your topic.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing, maybe if I go immediately, and I see here comments, people are talking about relationship. Yes, keeping a relationship. It's important also to emphasize again that good relationship is built on, you have on good work first, good work, keeping time, different, you have of course to show that you are a very good professional to build that relationship. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would also add that in terms of thinking about what's unique, and I see another question from Elias about your voice as a freelancer, is remember, think about what you have to offer that's unique. Like if you're from Marzabit, there are not many journalists working for international outlets from Marzabit, right? So already from that background, you have access to certain people, sources, insights that make you valuable. So I think one thing when I started out as a freelancer, I would look at what other people were doing and trying to mimic it. Whereas now, as I've grown as a journalist, I value my own perspective more and see, okay, what do I as Halima Gikandi have to offer, which, you know, I was raised in the US, but I'm Kenyan. So that gives me access to a lot of diasporan communities around the world when it comes to the Africa diaspora, which has helped me. And that's been a source of sources, that's been a source of ideas for stories. So think about what is unique about you, which you may take for granted. You know, you may have grown up in the rural coast in Kenya and may think, oh, I've been chasing something, but stop and think actually, okay, well, how does your background actually give you an advantage? Elias, if you're Ethiopian in Nairobi, think about, okay, in my hometown or my home village, what access to sources do I have there that can allow me now to pitch a story that is unique? Ultimately, though, when I see another question about, how not to lose your voice. Your voice is always there, again, based on the people you decide to interview, the stories you pitch, that is all your voice, but it does need to be edited to conform to the format and the standards of an outlet. But that doesn't mean you're losing your voice because it's still there. But anytime you have an disagreement, feel free to debate that. But ultimately, if you want everything to be the way you want it to be, I would suggest you create your own outlet, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about collaboration.
Thank you so much, Halima and Gilbert, for your brilliant and informative presentations. I've been refreshing some of my own personal pitches from the days back. I haven't pitched in a long time because I kind of switched from being a day-to-day reporter. I freelance for a while too, but I kind of switched. But just listening to you, it took me back to the days when, I used to do this for a living. I used to be chasing. And what it comes down from listening to you as well, it's what it all comes down to is that we as humans survive through storytelling. We are wired like that. We survived, we've survived so far through stories, our stories of resilience, our stories of hope, and that's how humans evolve as well. It's through stories. But when we are journalists, doesn't matter which platform that we work in, whether we work as a print or broadcast, we have a task duty, which is to tell stories. So we are storytellers, irrespective of the platform. So while we can get access to a lot of information, our job is how do we relay this information to the public, to our audience, to tell the story. And I think that's where journalism becomes, a craft, an art. It's about telling stories, and that telling the story starts right from the pitch that you craft. Because if you're able to succinctly tell a story that will be 1,000 words or more in 300 words, it means that you've actually, what you want to do. You have the story at your fingertips, and an editor will be forced to listen to you, because imagine the editor. I think every media platform, Marcy will tell you this as an editor, that they want to, they want content. But because they want content, they also receive a lot of interest from people out there trying to push in content to them. So as an editor, they also have a job to choose from the content that they receive to say, well, which one should I prioritize? And this is why it's important to get your pitch to stand out. But also remember, Halima and Gilbert already told us that, it's not the case that often when your pitch is ignored means it's not strong or it doesn't stand out. There are also different other other things, other factors that editors have to deal with. Maybe it's not the right fit, maybe it's the wrong platform, right? Or maybe they don't have time to work with you, like Halima and Gilbert have shared with us. So just have that in mind. Don't give up. Don't beat yourself that, I'm pitching and it's not getting any attention. And I'm glad that both Halima and Gilbert, they were quite measured and also, are level with the examples they gave. They gave examples of themselves, anecdotal examples of pitches they've shared that didn't cut it. So just know that it's important for you to keep trying, to never give up. And one key thing that came out is the more you pitch, the better you get at it. So don't stop pitching. Keep pitching, but also be deliberate about your pitches. Look for the right platform for your pitch. Research your topic properly. So when you reach out to these editors, you're going to win. You definitely going for it. You know what you're going for. You figured out your story through your pitches, but also don't be shy from reaching out for help. Gilbert was emphasizing that earlier, that if you are pitching and you've done a pitch, maybe sometimes send it to yourself, or look for a colleague who is familiar with the topic you're dealing with. Ask them, ask their opinion, and you'll be surprised what comes out from those feedback that you get. So I think I'm just trying to summarize what I have learned as well, as much as all of you here, about what to look out for. And Marcy earlier really quite also emphasize on just on you doing your research. That's important. I think everyone who has spoken has emphasized on the point of doing research. So research, and also have confidence, in what you do. It's your story. Don't undersell yourself. A pitch is actually a marketing strategy. People who study marketing knows about this. A pitch is a marketing thing. So don't undersell yourself, but at the same time, don't oversell as well. Be realistic. Don't say things that when it comes, Halima was making the example of if you want to do a story on like the US security, the CIA, is that information that you can get easily. I mean, the CIA is the most secretive institution on earth. It takes a lot to break into the CIA. So, if you're doing an investigative story for people, you want to look at the CIA, then that's just an example. But it speaks about being realistic in your pitches. And really, to me, one of the things I want to emphasize as we all leave this morning is the fact about focus. Don't pitch a topic, pitch a story. I think that is something I've seen a lot. I've been in different panels where I review pitches. I've seen that's the mistake I've seen a lot when people pitch topics. Halima gave an example of gender-based violence. Well, what about it? You know, that's a broader topic. What about gender-based violence? Do you want to look at, you know, the increase of gender-based violence in a specific county, but also not just because it's increasing, why is it increasing? Maybe that is something an editor will be interested in because they see some demographic changes, some certain things have changed. You know, maybe gender-based violence used to be known to be perpetrated, you know, by adults, you know, in an intimate partnership. But now we find probably maybe an increase between, you know, teenagers, GBV within teenagers. So that's something could be interesting. Recently, we launched a pitch on profiling female political candidates, right? Female political candidates. Well, that's quite broad in itself as well. So when you pick a candidate you want to profile, what is it about them that you want to profile? Is this a woman that is running for office for the first time in a predominantly male-dominated political atmosphere, where women have tried before, but a woman has even never run? That's something interesting. I think if I were an editor, I would be interested. Well, you know, this woman running in a very patriarchal society, a male-dominated thing. We know the political scene is very tough. What is it about this woman running in this particular space? So I'm just like, you know, trying to get into it to say, when you're pitching, don't pitch a topic, pitch a story. And already do your research, and if you do your research, you will know. And if it's a story that you're selecting characters, because for some stories, especially if we're doing a feature stories, for feature stories, sometimes you will have to go with characters, people that you choose to tell a bigger story. And you have to choose these characters very keenly as well. So having said that, Halima's hand is up.
I don't know, can we still have a few minutes? Because this is also reminding me of a few things.
Okay.
I'm happy to put from my outlet, to put my email if anyone has pitches. But just to keep in mind from what we've talked about, we are a radio program first. So they have to be radio pitches. And even let's say you're a Tanzanian journalist who's worked for the New York Times, all of these great articles, that won't actually help you in your pitch, because what our editors want to see is that you can do radio. So you're much better off if you're like a Ghanaian journalist who's done local radio stories, share those links. That will give you a much better advantage. I'm just giving that an example of the decisions that editors are making, and why like medium matters, because our editors don't want to have to spend, you know, a bunch of days teaching somebody how to do radio. But I'm happy to put my email there. Two, we all make mistakes. That's how we learn. We try not to make mistakes, but it's better to own up to a mistake when you see it, than to try hiding it. Because, and I can give an example. I remember when I was freelancing for US radio, I was doing a quick news story about the Ethiopian Airlines crash. I could never remember, was it like 787, 737? I kept confusing the numbers. And I noticed that like 5 minutes before it was literally meant to go on the air, that I had said it wrong and that the editor hadn't caught it either. So I was freaking out in that moment of, what do I do? Do I let it slip? Do I message them? I have no clue. So first I emailed them. It's like, hey, and then I called them. It's like, hey, this is wrong. And so they were able, and I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. But then they were able to cut that line out before it went on to air. And I was really afraid about the reaction. But they said, hey, no problem. Thanks for letting us know. And even the editor said, I should have caught that. So I'm sorry. So imagine if I had just let it go. You can't go back and correct it once everyone's heard it on the radio. And then later I got a message about, hey, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you saw this. So mistakes are part of the process. If you go on outlets like the New York Times or National Public Radio, there's a whole section for corrections. That's how it should be. So communicate your mistakes, try not to make them, but they will happen, but communicate them as soon as you can, because that will get you more respect with the person you're working with when you're able to own up with your mistake instead of ghosting and being like, oh, bye. Because then that will give you a better reputation. That's all. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Halima, for that. Quite helpful. And please take note of that. And I think it also comes when you do mistake and you own up, that's accountability. And as journalists, that's we're trying to push accountability all the time, you know, on the public, in the people we go after. So we have to practice what we preach as well. When we make a mistake, we own up, you know, and that's transparency. We own up to it. But the point is, we try not to repeat that mistake. I wanted to check now with Mercy if you have any final thoughts just before, so that we can wrap up this session. Mercy?
Yes, thanks, Mustafa. Thanks, Halima and Gilbert. That was quite a morning for everyone. I really don't want to add so much. But I think what I take from this training this morning is that pitching is really the lifeline of journalism. So I think we need to keep in mind that every time you're thinking of doing a story, just know that that story is heavily dependent on how you're going to pitch. Whether you're really going to pitch it, like we've been taught this morning, by writing an email, by reaching out to the editor, or you're just going to pitch it in your head. Yeah. So just know that pitching is actually just the lifeline of journalism. And my final thoughts would be, I think we have quite a number of JHR trained journalists in this forum. I just want to pose a challenge to you. Now that you have quite some adequate information about pitching, I really encourage you to put that into use. Next time we have like a call for proposals, kindly just take your time and put everything that you have learned into use, and let us see an improvement in the pitches that you're going to receive moving forward. So that, I mean, this training really makes, you know, that is how we're going to get that this training has been worth our time. So thank you for paying attention, and thank you for your indulgence. We'll continue engaging you more. And like Halima has said, that's another opportunity for you guys to practice what you've learned. Send those pitches to them, to IPA, as well as to JHR, and let us continue practicing and improving our art as we seek to say, and as we seek to tell more stories. So basically, Mustafa, that is all from me. I really had a great morning. It was really worth my time. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Mercy Mutoni Njuvuge, Halima Gikandi, Amel Gilbert. The three of you, thank you so much for delivering brilliant and informative presentations. We've all learned from your knowledge and from your experiences this morning. We thank you very much, and we're definitely looking forward to continuing this collaboration, this work. For the participants who have joined us today from different places, for journalists, I see a lot of familiar faces, but I also see new faces. We're glad to have all of you here today. We appreciated your participation. This training has gone on since 8 a.m. and I see we have managed to keep attention of everyone for the whole time. We still have over about 60 people still on the call at this point. It means it's demonstrated that it's worth your time, and you've also decided to sacrifice that time to learn something from here this morning. We thank you very much for that, and we're looking forward to continue to work with you. This training has been brought to you by Journalists for Human Rights in collaboration with the International Press Association of Eastern Africa. And definitely I must endeavor to also mention that JHR brings you this training under the Canada World Voice Women and Girls Project in Kenya, funded by Global Affairs Canada. And we'd like to thank everyone for your time. We've come to the end. We'll be in touch, and we'll see you all. We'll see you all again very soon. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at JHR News or at VWGRS, but also go on Twitter and follow the International Press Association of Eastern Africa. You can find them on Twitter. Maybe Halima or Gilbert will put it. You can find them on Twitter as, I think it is IPA East Africa. Yeah, I think it's IPA East Africa, but also you can check the website which has been shared with you there. The next steps will be my colleague Bernard will share with all of you a short form, an evaluation form, which you will fill. The idea is we'd like to pick feedback on, what this, whether the impact of this training on you, whether you've learned, or whether you have any suggestion for us to improve for subsequent training. We'll appreciate if you fill the evaluations shared by Bernard, not now, but you will share. And we will also share with you both the presentations from Mercy as well as Gilbert and Halima. I would like to thank you all very much. Once more, my name is Mustafa Dumbuya, and I'm the team leader at Journalists for Human Rights. Thank you all, and have a winning week. Bye.